The Montana Territory, 1879, was a land of merciless beauty, where the wind howled like a lonesome coyote across the endless prairie, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the promise of hardship. Ethan Caldwell, a man carved from the rugged stone of this frontier, rode his black stallion Midnight along the western boundary of his trading post as the first light of dawn painted the horizon in hues of amber and rose. His face, weathered by 40 winters and scorched by relentless summers, bore the stoic mask of a survivor, a half-Blackfoot, half-white scout who had once tracked renegades for the U.S. Army and now sought solace in the disciplined rhythms of his isolated outpost. The Caldwell trading post, perched near the banks of the Yellowstone River, stood as a defiant monument to endurance, a solitary beacon in a land that demanded everything and offered little in return. Midnight snorted, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the crisp morning air, as Ethan crested a low ridge that offered a sweeping view of the trading post below. The main building, a sturdy fortress of hand-hewn logs, puffed thin tendrils of smoke from its stone chimney, a sign that Clara Thompson, the post's iron-willed housekeeper, was already at work preparing breakfast. The 3 Blackfoot men who labored alongside Ethan, Thomas Red Elk, Joseph Swift Fox, and young William Crow, would be stirring, checking inventory, or readying the corrals for any weary travelers who might stumble upon this remote haven between Fort Benton and the gold-rich hills of Bozeman. Ethan's life here was a carefully constructed bulwark against the past, each day a ritual of purpose designed to keep the ghosts of memory at bay. Once a man of 2 worlds, he now belonged to neither, his heart a no-man's land where love and loss waged an endless war. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured to Midnight, his voice low and steady, the kind that could calm a spooked horse or silence a room. He guided the stallion toward home, the ache in his leg, a souvenir from an old Blackfoot arrow flaring with the morning chill. The trading post came into sharper focus as he descended the ridge, its log walls glowing golden in the rising sun. Smaller outbuildings dotted the grounds, a storehouse, a barn, and a vegetable garden where Clara waged a fierce battle against the elements to coax life from the stubborn soil. Ethan dismounted with the practiced ease of a man who had spent half his life in the saddle, ignoring the twinge in his leg as he tied Midnight to the hitching post. "Mornin', Mr. Caldwell," called William Crow, the youngest of his workers, his arms laden with sacks of flour bound for the storehouse. His dark eyes sparkled with the optimism of youth, a rarity in this unforgiving land. "Thomas says a storm's rollin' in from the northwest, might hit by nightfall." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable, acknowledging the warning without breaking stride. His relationships with his men were built on mutual respect and economy of words, professional, predictable, and free of the emotional entanglements he had forsaken 5 years ago. They admired him, perhaps even feared the quiet intensity that clung to him like gunsmoke, but none could claim to know the man behind the legend. Ethan Caldwell was a fortress, his walls as impregnable as the trading post itself. Inside, the main room enveloped him in warmth, the air thick with the comforting aroma of brewing coffee and sizzling bacon. Clara Thompson, a widow in her mid-50s whose stern demeanor masked a heart as steadfast as the Montana mountains, stood at the iron stove, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She barely glanced up as Ethan entered, her spatula flipping bacon with military precision. "You're late," she said, her tone carrying the familiar edge of their morning ritual. "Food's getting cold." Ethan offered no reply, hanging his weathered duster and wide-brimmed hat on the peg by the door. His Winchester rifle found its place in the rack, with the same deliberate care he applied to every task. He took his seat at the head of the oak table, its surface polished to a sheen by years of Clara's relentless scrubbing. The room, like every inch of the Caldwell trading post, was a study in order, a snapshot frozen in time. A pair of tiny beaded moccasins hung near the door, too small for any grown foot. A shelf displayed a collection of wooden animals, bears, wolves, and eagles, carved with a father's love, now gathering dust despite Clara's best efforts. On the wall, a charcoal sketch captured a younger Ethan, his face unlined by grief, standing beside a Blackfoot woman with gentle eyes and a girl of 7, her smile as bright as a prairie sunrise. Willow Song and Starling, his wife and daughter, lost to a raid that had shattered his world. Clara set a plate before him, 2 eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and a cornbread muffin, arranged with the precision of a general's battle plan, the same breakfast she had served every morning for 5 years. Ethan poured his coffee, the steam curling like a prayer. "Thomas wants to move the horses to the south pasture before the storm," he said, breaking the silence. "I'll tell him," Clara replied, jotting a note in the small ledger she kept in her apron pocket. She managed the trading post's operations with the same rigor Ethan demanded of himself, her efficiency a mirror to his discipline. "Captain Hayes rode by yesterday while you were out," she added, refilling his cup. "Said there was trouble on the Bozeman Trail. Wagon train got hit, maybe 15 miles south of here." Ethan grunted, the news stirring no visible reaction. The Montana Territory was a crucible of danger in 1879, where bandits, renegade raids, and the whims of nature tested the mettle of those chasing dreams of gold or homesteads. "Not our concern," he said, returning to his meal. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, a silent rebuke. "He said there might be survivors, Ethan. Women and children among them." The only sign that her words struck home was the brief pause before Ethan's next bite. 5 years ago, such news would have spurred him into action, saddling midnight and riding out with supplies to aid the desperate. 5 years ago, before the raid that stole Willow Song and Starling, Ethan Caldwell had been a man who believed in hope. Now he was a man who believed in walls. "The army will handle it," he said flatly, rising from the table. "I'll be checking the South Ridge. Have Thomas meet me there at noon." He was halfway to the door when the sound of hoofbeats shattered the morning's quiet. Travelers to the Caldwell trading post were not uncommon: army patrols, Blackfoot families, or prospectors seeking supplies. But the urgent cadence of these hooves set Ethan's instincts ablaze. He moved to the window, his hand instinctively brushing the Colt revolver at his hip. Through the dust, he saw Captain Daniel Hayes and 2 soldiers, leading a 4th horse. Slumped in its saddle was a small figure, shrouded in a blood-stained blanket. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whatever Hayes was bringing to his doorstep spelled trouble, and Ethan Caldwell had spent 5 years banishing trouble from his life. "Clara, we've got company," he said, his voice a low growl devoid of emotion. "Prepare the guest room." Clara's eyes widened. In 5 years, the guest room had housed only paying travelers, never unannounced burdens delivered by army officers. But she nodded, her hands already moving to gather linens, as Ethan stepped outside to face the storm that was about to break over his carefully ordered world. The Montana sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dusty yard of the Caldwell trading post as Captain Daniel Hayes and his small escort reined in their horses. Ethan Caldwell stood on the porch, his broad frame blocking the entrance like a sentinel guarding a sacred threshold. His hazel eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in the scene. Hayes, a young officer at 28 whose earnest demeanor had earned Ethan's grudging respect. 2 soldiers, their blue uniforms faded from months on the frontier. And a 4th horse, its rider a small, fragile figure wrapped in a tattered blanket stained with the rusty hue of dried blood. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the colt at his hip, not out of threat but from a scout's instinct that had kept him alive through years of border wars and ambushes. Trouble had ridden into his world, and he intended to meet it on his terms. Hayes dismounted, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he approached. His face, boyish despite the weight of command, was etched with grim determination. The soldiers remained with the fourth horse, gently easing the small figure to the ground. "Caldwell," Hayes nodded, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "I know you're not one for surprises, but I'm not here to sell you anything." Ethan's gaze flicked to the child, a girl, perhaps 10 or 11, her dark hair tangled in sweat-soaked clumps, her clothes torn and caked with dirt and blood. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared past the men, past the trading post, into some private abyss that Ethan recognized all too well. It was the same hollow stare he had seen in his own reflection after the raid that took Willow's Song and Starling 5 years ago. "Whatever you're bringing, I'm not buying," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble like thunder rolling across the prairie. He stepped forward, subtly reinforcing his position as gatekeeper of his domain. Hayes sighed, pushing back his cavalry hat to reveal a forehead slick with sweat. "I'm not asking you to buy, Ethan. I'm asking for help." He gestured toward the girl, who now leaned heavily against one of the soldiers, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. "This is all that's left of a wagon train hit on the Bozeman Trail yesterday morning. Bandits, Dixon's gang, we think. By the time we found the wreckage, she was the only survivor. Hid herself in a rock outcropping near the wagons. Hasn't spoken a word since." Ethan's chest tightened, an unwelcome surge of memory threatening to breach his defenses. He saw Starling's face in his mind's eye, her laughter echoing across the Montana hills, silenced forever by men like those who had left this child orphaned. He forced his gaze away from the girl, fixing it on Hayes instead. "Take her to Fort Benton," he said, his tone clipped. "Or to Willow Creek. The preacher's wife there takes in strays." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice so the soldiers wouldn't hear. "We tried the fort. The doc says she won't eat, barely sleeps, just stares like that. The preacher's wife in Willow Creek is already stretched thin with 4 orphans from last winter's smallpox outbreak." He met Ethan's eyes, unflinching. "You've got space here, Ethan. You've got the means. And, God help me for saying it, you know what she's going through better than anyone in this territory." The mention of Ethan's loss, Willow's Song and Starling, names unspoken in the trading post for 5 years, ignited a spark of fury in his chest. "Don't you dare use them against me, Hayes," he growled, his hand tightening on the Colt's grip. "Not for this." Before Hayes could respond, Clara Thompson appeared in the doorway, her apron dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Her sharp eyes softened as they landed on the girl, and she moved past Ethan with the purposeful stride of a woman who had buried her own sorrows and emerged stronger for it. "Oh, you poor lamb," she murmured, her voice a blend of maternal warmth and frontier pragmatism. "Come inside, child. We'll get you cleaned up and fed." The girl, Emily, as they would later learn, didn't react to Clara's words, her gaze still lost in that distant void. But when Clara reached for her arm, Emily flinched violently, a small, animal-like whimper escaping her lips as she pulled away. The soldier supporting her spoke up, his voice heavy with fatigue. "She's been like that since we found her, ma'am. Doc gave her laudanum to sleep last night, but she woke up screaming. Took 2 of us to keep her from hurting herself." Clara knelt slowly, her movements deliberate, like a rancher approaching a spooked colt. She made no further attempt to touch the girl, instead meeting her eyes with a calm that seemed to anchor the moment. "My name's Clara Thompson, child. This here's the Caldwell trading post, near the Yellowstone River. You're safe now, I promise you that." For the first time, a flicker of awareness passed through Emily's vacant eyes. She looked from Clara to the sturdy log walls of the trading post, then to Ethan, who stood like a granite statue on the porch. Something in his stern, weathered face seemed to register with her, perhaps the shadow of shared grief, a silent acknowledgement of wounds too deep for words. "What's her name?" Clara asked, turning to Hayes. The captain shook his head, his expression one of frustrated helplessness. "We don't know for sure. She hasn't spoken. We found a journal in the wreckage, belonging to a John and Abigail Dawson from St. Louis, traveling with their daughter, Emily. We're assuming that's her, but we can't be certain." "Emily," Clara repeated softly, as if testing the name's weight. "That's a fine name, isn't it, child?" Emily showed no reaction, her small body swaying slightly with exhaustion, but her eyes remained fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see through the walls he had built around his heart. Ethan felt trapped by that gaze, cornered by the weight of her silent suffering. In her eyes, he saw the same emptiness that had nearly consumed him after the raid, the same silence that had driven him to the edge of madness in those first, terrible months. "One night," he said abruptly, his voice cutting through the tension like a Bowie knife. "She can stay one night. Then you take her to Willow Creek or send word to Fort Benton to make arrangements." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode toward the stables, ignoring Clara's disapproving frown and Hayes's knowing nod. He had no intention of letting this child, this living echo of his own loss, breach the fortress of his solitude. By sunset, the storm Thomas Red Elk had predicted descended upon the trading post with biblical fury. Howling winds tore across the prairie, rattling the shutters and driving sheets of icy rain against the log walls. Ethan sat in his office, a sanctuary of order where ledgers and maps lined the shelves, and a single glass of whiskey sat untouched on his desk. The room was a reflection of his mind, meticulous, controlled, and sealed against intrusion. But tonight, unfamiliar sounds pierced the silence, soft footsteps, hesitant and light, the presence of a child in his home for the first time in 5 years. Clara had spent the afternoon coaxing Emily to eat, to bathe, to show any sign that she was more than a ghost haunting their walls. Her efforts had met with little success until, unexpectedly, Thomas Red Elk's arrival sparked a reaction. The tall Blackfoot man, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, had come to report on the horses. At the sight of his red bandana, a practical accessory for dust and wind, Emily had recoiled in terror, her hands raised as if to fend off a blow. "It's the bandana," Clara explained later, after Thomas retreated, his face a mask of concern. Hayes said some of the attackers wore red bandanas over their faces. Poor child must think he's one of them. Now, as the storm raged outside, Ethan heard those light footsteps again, not Clara's familiar tread but something tentative, almost ghostly. He rose from his desk just as the office door creaked open a few inches. Emily stood in the doorway, her small figure illuminated by the flickering glow of the fireplace. Clara had managed to get her into a clean nightgown, one of Starling's, preserved like a holy relic in a cedar chest at the foot of his daughter's untouched bed. The sight of it on the stranger's body sent a jolt of irrational anger through Ethan, a violation of the sacred space he had guarded for so long. "You should be in bed," he said, his voice harsher than he intended, roughened by the whiskey he hadn't touched and the memories he couldn't escape. Emily didn't flinch at his tone. Instead, she took a cautious step into the room, her eyes sweeping over the bookshelves, the hand-drawn maps pinned to the walls, the worn leather armchair by the fire. A deafening crack of thunder shook the trading post, and she moved with startling speed to the farthest corner of the room, pressing her back against the wall, her eyes wide with primal fear. Ethan recognized the instinct, not just fear of the storm, but the desperate need for a defensible position, back to the wall, eyes on all entrances. It was how he had lived for months after the raid, sleeping with a rifle across his chest, jumping at every shadow. "It's just thunder," he said, making no move toward her, his voice softer now, though it felt awkward, unpracticed. "You're safe in here." The words tasted hollow, a promise he had no right to make. He hadn't kept his own family safe, Willow Song's laughter silenced, Starling's tiny hand cold in his. What could he offer this child? Emily slid down the wall, curling into a tight ball, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes never leaving him. Despite her fear, there was something assessing in her gaze, as if she were measuring him, testing the strength of the man who stood before her. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair, the weight of her presence pressing against the edges of his solitude. "Clara put you in the guest room," he said, and she gave a slight nod, the first direct response she had offered anyone. "It's the safest room in the house," he continued, surprised by his own need to fill the silence. Thick walls, small window too high for anyone to climb through. Doors solid oak with a heavy bolt. He was describing a bunker, not a bedroom, but the details seemed to ease her tension. Her grip on her knees loosened, her shoulders relaxing a fraction. Another clap of thunder rattled the windows, and Emily's eyes squeezed shut, her body tensing again. Without thinking, Ethan crossed to the bookshelf and pulled down a worn volume, its leather cover softened by years of handling. "My daughter," he stopped, clearing his throat, the word daughter a knife in his chest. "I used to read this to her during storms. Helps drown out the noise." He opened the book to a familiar passage, his deep voice steady as he began to read. "In the wide valley, where the Yellowstone curves like a silver ribbon, there lived an old grizzly bear who remembered the days before the iron horse roared across the plains. The story was a fanciful tale of talking animals and ancient spirits, one Starling had loved for its magic and wonder." As Ethan read, Emily's rigid posture softened, her eyes fixed on him, the terror in them giving way to a glimmer of curiosity. The words wove a fragile bridge across the chasm of their separate griefs, a momentary reprieve from the storm outside and the storms within. Clara appeared in the doorway half an hour later, her expression one of quiet astonishment. Ethan Caldwell, who had rationed his words like precious ammunition for 5 years, was reading aloud from his daughter's favorite book, his voice a low, soothing cadence. Emily sat wrapped in a quilt from his armchair, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep, a bowl of untouched broth on the table beside her. "I've prepared a tray for the child," Clara said softly, careful not to break the spell. "Some broth and cornbread." Ethan closed the book, suddenly self-conscious, the weight of his actions settling over him. "Good. She needs to eat." Clara's voice seemed to snap Emily back to her guarded state, the vacant look returning as she pulled the quilt tighter around herself. "Come, child," Clara coaxed. "Just a few spoonfuls. You need your strength." Emily didn't move, her eyes locked on Ethan as if he were the only anchor in a sea of chaos. The weight of that trust pressed against him, a burden he had sworn never to carry again. 5 years ago, he had vowed to need no one, to let no one need him. Yet here he was, unable to turn away. "Bring the tray in here, Clara," he found himself saying. "She can eat by the fire." Clara's eyebrows rose, but she nodded and disappeared to fetch the food. Ethan turned to Emily, his voice firm but not unkind. "This changes nothing. Tomorrow you go to Willow Creek. The preacher and his wife are good folks. They'll find you a proper home." Emily's expression didn't change, but she shook her head once, a definitive gesture that spoke louder than words. She had no intention of leaving. When Clara returned with the tray, Emily accepted the bowl of broth without protest, eating slowly, mechanically, her eyes still tracking Ethan as he paced before the fire. "We'll need to inform Captain Hayes if there are any relatives to contact," Clara said, watching the girl with a blend of concern and practicality. "Though if she was traveling from St. Louis, I reckon they're a long way off." Ethan grunted, his mind snagged on the sight of Emily in Starling's nightgown, eating from a bowl that had once held his daughter's supper. It was like watching a ghost inhabit his carefully ordered world, stirring memories he had buried beneath layers of routine. "Hayes mentioned a journal," he said abruptly. "Did he leave it?" Clara nodded. "It's in the kitchen." Didn't feel right to read it without permission. She retrieved a small, leather-bound book, its pages warped from exposure but still legible. Emily's eyes widened at the sight of it, and she set down her bowl, reaching for the journal with a sudden urgency that broke through her stoic facade. "Yours?" Ethan asked quietly. Emily shook her head, then nodded, a complicated gesture that suggested it belonged to her, but not entirely. "Her mother's maybe," Clara suggested. "May I?" She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Emily relinquished the journal. Clara opened it carefully, turning to the first page. "Property of Abigail Dawson. Journey began April 10th, 1879, from St. Louis, Missouri to Montana Territory." She skimmed a few pages, her eyes tracing the neat handwriting. "It's a record of their travels, daily notes on weather, landmarks, folks they met along the way." Emily watched intently, her face showing the first signs of emotion beyond fear, a desperate yearning for the words that connected her to her lost family. "Here's something," Clara said, pausing at an entry near the middle of the book. Emily turned 10 today. John carved her a little bear from cedar wood. She named it Grizzly, after the bear we saw crossing the Platte River last month. She says she'll start her own journal when we reach our new home, to write about all our adventures in Montana. At the mention of her name, Emily began to tremble, silent tears tracing paths down her pale cheeks. It was the first time she had cried since arriving, according to Hayes. Ethan felt a crack in the fortress he had built around his heart, the girl's grief a mirror to his own, long suppressed. "That's enough for tonight," he said roughly, his voice betraying the turmoil within. "She needs rest." Clara nodded, closing the journal. "I'll stay with her until she falls asleep." "No," Ethan said, surprising himself as much as Clara. "I'll do it. You've been up since dawn, and tomorrow will be a long day with the storm damage." Clara studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for something she hadn't seen in him for years. "As you wish, Mr. Caldwell," she said finally. "Try to get her to finish the broth if you can." After Clara left, Ethan stood awkwardly in the center of his office, unsure how to proceed. Emily had stopped crying, but her eyes remained bright with unshed tears, her small body rigid with contained emotion. "You should finish eating," he said, gesturing to the abandoned bowl. "Then sleep. Tomorrow will," he paused, the words feeling inadequate. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Emily made no move toward the broth. Instead, she pointed to the book Ethan had set aside, her gesture unmistakable. "You want me to keep reading?" he asked. She nodded, small but certain. Ethan hesitated, then picked up the book again, settling into the armchair by the fire. "A few more pages, then sleep," he said, opening to where they had left off. The old grizzly bear had seen 60 winters and knew the secrets of the stars that guided the buffalo across the plains. As he read, the storm outside seemed to fade, the words weaving a fragile cocoon around them. Emily listened, her eyes never leaving him, and for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Caldwell felt the stirrings of something he thought he had buried forever. The instinct to protect, to nurture, to be more than a survivor in a land that took far more than it gave. Dawn broke over the Caldwell trading post with a clarity that only a Montana storm could bestow, the sky a boundless canvas of gold and blue, scrubbed clean by the night's fury. Ethan Caldwell stood on the porch, his calloused hands wrapped around a tin mug of Clara Thompson's strong coffee, surveying the wreckage left in the storm's wake. The corral fence sagged where a pine had fallen, shingles littered the ground like scattered playing cards, and the creek behind the trading post roared with snowmelt, its banks swollen to twice their usual width. Ethan's hazel eyes, sharp and unyielding, catalogued the damage with a scout's precision, but his mind was elsewhere, tethered to the small figure sleeping in the guest room, a child who had slipped past his defenses like a whisper of wind through a cracked window. He had been up before first light, the weight of decisions pressing against him like the heavy air before a thunderstorm. Emily Dawson, the girl Captain Daniel Hayes had brought to his doorstep, was a complication he hadn't anticipated, a living reminder of the family he had lost 5 years ago to a raid that still haunted his dreams. Ethan had built the trading post into a fortress of routine, each day a bulwark against the chaos of grief, but Emily's presence threatened to unravel it all. One night he had told Hayes, yet the storm's aftermath had conspired to keep her here longer, and Ethan felt the ground shifting beneath him. Clara emerged from the main building, her gray hair glinting in the morning sun, a second mug of coffee in her hand. "Thomas says the trail to Willow Creek is washed out," she announced, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of a schoolmarm. "Won't be passable for 3 days, maybe a week." She handed Ethan the mug, her eyes studying him with a knowing intensity that made him bristle. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he accepted the coffee without comment. The news meant Emily would remain at the trading post, her silent presence a constant challenge to his resolve. Clara's expression, tinged with a quiet satisfaction, suggested she viewed this as a divine intervention, a chance to soften the edges of Ethan's hardened heart. "How's the girl?" he asked, his tone gruff, deflecting her unspoken expectations. "Still sleeping," Clara replied, folding her arms. "Poor thing was exhausted. I've laid out some of Starling's old clothes, might be a touch small, but they'll do until we can get proper ones from town." She paused, her gaze pointed. "And when we can get to town, she'll go to the preacher's wife as you planned." Ethan met her look with a steady one of his own, his voice firm. "That's the plan." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of boots crunching on gravel interrupted her. Thomas Red Elk approached from the stables, his broad frame moving with the easy grace of a man at home in the wilderness. He removed his hat, revealing a streak of gray in his black hair, his expression serious but not alarmed. "Mornin', Mr. Caldwell," Thomas said, his deep voice carrying the cadence of his Blackfoot heritage. "Trouble with the north fence." Lightning hit the big cottonwood, took down about 30 yards of fencing. "Cattle could wander into Crow land if we don't fix it today." Ethan drained his coffee, the bitter heat grounding him. "I'll ride out. Have Joseph prepare my gear." Thomas hesitated, glancing toward the trading post door. Captain Hayes stopped by the bunkhouse at first light. "Checking on the girl. Said he's sending word to Fort Benton about her, but it might be a few days before they can send someone. Storm hit them hard, too." "Fine," Ethan said, handing his empty mug to Clara. "We'll deal with it when they come." Until then, keep her out of my way." He turned to leave, but a small figure appeared in the doorway, freezing him in his tracks. Emily stood there, dressed in a faded blue dress that Ethan recognized with a visceral pang. It was Starling's, preserved in a cedar chest like a relic of a life he could never reclaim. The dress was slightly short at the ankles, but it fit well enough, and Emily's pale face, shadowed by the nightmares that had woken her in the pre-dawn hours, held a new alertness as her eyes moved from Ethan to Thomas and back again. Thomas, remembering her terror at his red bandana the day before, took a cautious step back and touched the brim of his hat, the bandana now replaced with a plain leather cord. "Miss," he said, his gruff voice softened with care. "Good to see you up and about." Emily didn't respond, but she didn't shrink away either, a small victory in itself. Instead, she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet silent on the weathered planks, and approached the railing to survey the trading post grounds. Her expression remained unreadable, but her gaze mirrored Ethan's earlier assessment, as if she, too, were calculating the cost of the storm's wrath. "I've got breakfast ready," Clara said, placing a protective hand near Emily's shoulder, careful not to touch her. "Flapjacks and bacon. You need to eat, child, to keep your strength up." Emily turned to look up at Ethan, her eyes carrying that same disconcerting directness, as if waiting for his permission, his lead. The weight of her reliance pressed against him, a silent demand he wasn't ready to meet. "Go on," Ethan said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Do as Clara says." After a moment's hesitation, Emily nodded and followed Clara inside, but at the door she paused, looking back at Ethan with a question in her eyes, a question he couldn't or wouldn't decipher. "Strange one, isn't she?" Thomas observed once she was gone, his tone thoughtful. "Hayes says she hasn't spoken a word since they found her. Doc thinks it might be permanent, shock messing with her mind." "Not our problem," Ethan replied, though the words lacked their usual conviction. "Let's focus on that fence before the crow used this as an excuse to rustle our cattle again." He turned toward the stables, determined to lose himself in the physical demands of the day's work, where the world made sense and emotions could be buried beneath sweat and strain. For the next several hours, Ethan and Thomas toiled under the Montana sun, repairing the north fence in a landscape transformed by the storm's violence. The ground was a treacherous mire of mud, the fallen cottonwood a tangled mass of splintered wood, but the work was straightforward, a blessed reprieve from the complexities waiting back at the trading post. Ethan drove posts into the earth with a rhythm that echoed the hymns he'd once heard in frontier churches: work as salvation, labor as redemption. By mid-afternoon, the fence was secure, the cattle safe, and Ethan's muscles ached with the satisfying burn of a job well done. As they turned their horses toward home, the trading post came into view, its log walls a beacon of stability against the rolling prairie. But as they crested the hill, Ethan pulled up short, his instincts flaring. A covered wagon, not the Army's standard issue, was parked in front of the trading post, its canvas flapping in the breeze. It belonged to Henry Larson, Willow Creek's general store owner, a man whose presence was rarely a good omen. And standing on the porch, engaged in animated conversation with Clara, was Margaret Larson, Henry's wife, a woman whose tongue could outrun a stagecoach and whose gossip spread faster than a prairie fire. "That's all we need," Ethan muttered, his voice low. "The whole territorial know about our guest by sundown." Thomas chuckled, a rare sound from the stoic Blackfoot. "Probably already does." Nothing moves faster than Margaret Larson's mouth. Ethan considered bypassing the main building, retreating to the stables until the Larsons departed, but as he watched, Emily appeared in the doorway. Even from a distance, her discomfort was palpable, her shoulders rigid, her small frame half hidden behind Clara. Margaret was reaching toward her, her mouth moving in what Ethan knew was a barrage of questions cloaked in false sympathy. Emily backed away, her face turned from the woman's invasive curiosity. "Damn it," Ethan growled, spurring Midnight down the hill, Thomas close behind. By the time they reached the yard, Emily had retreated inside, but Margaret's voice carried like a revival preacher's sermon. "The poor dear. And to think she saw such horrors. Henry says the army found 12 bodies, all shot and scalped. They're blaming Kane's gang, but you know how these things get pinned on the first outlaws folks think of." "Mrs. Larson," Ethan interrupted, dismounting and handing his reins to Thomas with a look that sent the Blackfoot man toward the stables. He removed his hat with cold courtesy, his presence commanding silence. "This is an unexpected visit." Margaret, a stout woman of 40 with hair piled high in an elaborate bun, and a dress that screamed city fashion in a frontier world, turned to him with a beaming smile. "Oh, Mr. Caldwell. Captain Hayes mentioned you taken in that poor orphan girl. I was delivering supplies to the McKinleys. Their barn was torn clean off in the storm, can you imagine? And thought I'd bring some things for the child. Growing girls need proper clothes, and I had my daughter Clara's old dresses packed away. Such a blessing they can be put to use." "Emily," Clara corrected firmly, stepping forward. "Her name's Emily." "Of course, Emily," Margaret waved a hand undeterred. "Such a lovely name. Does she talk yet?" Captain Hayes said she was struck dumb by the horror of it all. "My cousin's boy was the same after he saw his pa crushed by a runaway wagon, didn't speak for a month, then woke up one morning reciting the Lord's Prayer like a circuit preacher. Strangest thing." Ethan stepped onto the porch, deliberately positioning himself between Margaret and the door, his patience fraying like an old rope. "We appreciate your thoughtfulness, Mrs. Larson, but Emily's resting. The army will send for her soon." His tone left no room for negotiation, a warning wrapped in civility. Margaret's eyes widened with theatrical horror. "Oh, surely you're not sending her to those rough soldiers. A delicate child who suffered such trauma needs a woman's care. Now, Reverend Thompson and his wife have their hands full with those smallpox orphans, but Henry and I were just saying over breakfast how quiet our house has been since Clara married and moved to Helena." She paused, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Of course, a man's home feels so empty without the sound of children. I'm sure you understand that better than most, Mr. Caldwell." The deliberate reference to Willow's song and Starling sent a surge of cold anger through Ethan, his hand tightening on the porch railing until his knuckles blanched. Clara made a small sound of disapproval, but before either could respond, a soft scuffing drew their attention. Emily stood in the doorway again, her dark hair pulled back with one of Starling's ribbons, a detail that struck Ethan like a bullet. Her cheeks held a faint flush, a sign of life that hadn't been there the day before, and her eyes watched the exchange with a quiet intensity that belied her silence. Margaret pushed past Ethan, her voice rising to a cloying sweetness that set Ethan's teeth on edge. "There you are, you poor sweet thing. I'm Mrs. Larson from Willow Creek. I brought you some lovely dresses that belong to my daughter. She's grown and married now, living in Helena with 2 little ones of her own. Henry and I would be delighted to give you a proper home until your kin can be found." She reached for Emily's hand, but the girl stepped back quickly, bumping into the doorframe in her haste to avoid contact. "She doesn't care for being touched," Clara explained, moving to Emily's side, her tone firm but kind. "The doctor says it's common after severe shock." "Poor little lamb," Margaret crooned undeterred, leaning closer. "You'll feel better once you're settled in a proper family home. A child needs a mother's love, especially after such a terrible ordeal." Emily's eyes darted to Ethan, that same unspoken question burning in them, a plea he still couldn't fully interpret. "Mrs. Larson," Ethan said, his voice a low growl, his patience now a threadbare remnant. "We appreciate your concern, but decisions about Emily's welfare will be made by the proper authorities. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got work to attend to. The storm left us plenty to clean up." Margaret drew herself up, her face a mask of affronted dignity. "Well, I was only trying to help. It's what any good Christian woman would do." She glanced at Clara, her tone pointed. "I'll leave the dresses, they are in the wagon. Henry can bring them up." "No need to trouble your husband," Clara replied smoothly, her voice a velvet glove over an iron fist. "Joseph or one of the other men can fetch them before you leave." It was a polite dismissal, and Margaret had no choice but to accept it, casting a final pitying look at Emily as she descended the porch steps, her skirts swishing with indignation. "I'll be praying for the child," she called back, her voice dripping with sanctimonious fervor. "And for you, Mr. Caldwell. The Lord knows how hard it must be, having a young girl in your house again after." "Well, after everything." Ethan's grip on the railing tightened, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining his temper. Clara muttered under her breath, "That woman's got the sense of a stampeding mule." To everyone's surprise, a small sound came from Emily, not a laugh, but a faint huff, the ghost of amusement flickering across her lips before vanishing. For that brief moment, she was just a child, charmed by an adult's sharp wit. Clara and Ethan turned to her, startled by the sound, the first voluntary noise she had made since her arrival. The moment passed, and Emily's expression shuddered once more, but the spark had been real, a crack in the wall of her trauma. As she and Clara turned to go inside, Ethan felt an unfamiliar reluctance to return to his work. That almost smile had stirred something in him, a protective instinct he had thought burned away in the ashes of his past. "Mr. Caldwell," Clara paused at the door, her voice carrying the weight of routine but laced with something deeper. "Will you be joining us for supper at the usual time?" The question was ordinary, asked daily, but today it held an unspoken challenge. Would he sit at the table with them, or retreat to his office as he had done for years, dining alone with his ghosts? Ethan looked at Emily, standing silently beside Clara, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that felt like a dare. "Yes," he said finally, the word heavy with decision. "The usual time." Later that evening, after a supper that passed in quiet companionship, Emily eating slowly, her eyes flicking between Ethan and Clara as if memorizing their faces, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing the Trading Post's accounts. The ledger was a lifeline, its numbers a refuge from the emotional currents swirling through his home. He was deep in calculations, tallying the cost of storm repairs, when a soft knock at the door broke his focus. Emily stood in the doorway, clutching the same storybook he had read to her during the storm, her hair neatly braided, her nightgown clean but her eyes wide with alertness, no trace of sleep in them. "It's late," Ethan said, setting aside his ledger. "You should be in bed." Emily took a step into the room, then held out the book with a questioning look, her intention clear. Ethan hesitated. Last night had been an exception, a necessity born of the storm's chaos. Reading to her again would suggest a pattern, a commitment he wasn't prepared to make. "Clara can read to you," he said, turning back to his accounts. "She's better at it than I am." He expected her to leave, perhaps disappointed but acquiescent. Instead, Emily crossed the room with quiet determination, placing the book directly on his ledger, forcing him to confront it. When he looked up, her expression was resolute, her small hand pointing first at him, then at the book. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" Ethan observed, a reluctant note of admiration creeping into his voice. Emily nodded solemnly, then pointed again, her meaning unmistakable. Ethan sighed, relenting. One chapter, then bed. A hint of triumph flickered in her eyes as she settled into the armchair opposite his desk, tucking her feet beneath her, watching him expectantly. He opened the book to where they had left off, his voice settling into the familiar cadence. The old grizzly bear had seen the coming of the iron horse, its smoke curling like a dragon's breath across the plains. From the hallway, unseen by either, Clara watched the scene unfold, her lips curving in a rare smile. The road ahead would be long for both the grieving man and the traumatized child, but tonight, a small bridge had been built, a tentative step toward healing in a land that demanded resilience above all else. Ethan Caldwell was in the stables, discussing supply needs with Thomas Red Elk, when Joseph Swift Fox burst through the door, his breath ragged from a sprint across the yard. "Mr. Caldwell Ryder's Common," he gasped, his dark eyes wide with urgency. "4 men moving fast from the south." "Not army." Ethan's hand instinctively checked the Colt revolver at his hip, his scout's instincts flaring like a match struck in the dark. "Get Emily and Clara into the root cellar," he ordered, his voice a low growl that brooked no hesitation. "Tell them to stay there until I come for them." Joseph nodded and darted back toward the main building, his boots kicking up dust as he ran. Ethan handed the supply list to Thomas, his mind already mapping the terrain around the trading post, the ridges that offered cover, the trails that could conceal an ambush. "Stay sharp," he told Thomas. "This doesn't feel right." By the time Ethan reached the yard, the riders were rounding the final bend in the trail, their horses kicking up a haze of dust that shimmered in the midday heat. He took his position on the porch, his stance relaxed but ready hand resting casually on the Colt's grip. Thomas emerged from the storehouse, a Winchester rifle held low against his leg, his presence a silent reinforcement. 4 men rode into view, their appearances as rough as the Montana Badlands, trail-worn, heavily armed, and carrying the hard-eyed menace of men who lived by violence. The leader, a tall man with a thick mustache and a face weathered by years of sun and sin, reined in his horse, his cold gaze sweeping the trading post before settling on Ethan. "This the Caldwell place," the man called, his voice rough as gravel, making no move to dismount. His companions, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, a nervous youth with twitchy eyes, and a broad-shouldered brute wearing a red bandana, fanned out slightly, their hands hovering near their holsters. "It is," Ethan replied, his tone even betraying nothing. "Trading posts open if you're looking for supplies." His eyes locked onto the red bandana, a detail that sent a chill down his spine. Clara had mentioned Emily's terror at the sight of Thomas's bandana, linking it to the bandits who attacked her wagon train. These men weren't here by chance. The leader exchanged a glance with his men, a subtle signal that didn't escape Ethan's notice. "Name's Jacob Kane," he said, leaning forward in his saddle. "These are my associates. We're not here for trade. Looking for information." "What kind of information?" Ethan asked, his voice neutral though every nerve was taut as a bowstring. He shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself for a clear draw if needed. Kane's eyes narrowed, his attempt at a casual posture betrayed by the tension in his shoulders. "Heard there was trouble on the Bozeman Trail south of here. Wagon train hit a few days back. News travels fast." His tone was probing, testing Ethan's reaction. Ethan nodded, giving nothing away. "News travels." He let the silence hang, forcing Kane to press further. "Army been through?" Kane asked, his voice sharpening. "Asking questions, maybe bringing survivors here." The question confirmed Ethan's suspicions. These were no curious travelers. They were hunting, checking to see if anyone had escaped their slaughter. Captain Hayes passed by, Ethan said carefully, his words measured. Said it was Kane's gang that hit the wagons. You boys know anything about that? He watched the man with the red bandana stiffen, his hand drifting toward his holster before Kane shot him a warning glance. Heard of Kane, the leader replied, his smile thin and humorless. Nasty piece of work. We're just wondering if there were any survivors. Might be kin of ours in that wagon train. The lie was as transparent as a saloon window, but Ethan kept his expression impassive. Army didn't mention survivors, he lied, aware of Thomas shifting into a better firing position near the storehouse corner. Said it was a clean sweep. Nobody left to tell the tale. Kane studied him, weighing the truth of his words, his eyes glinting with suspicion. Mind if we water our horses? Kane asked, his tone deceptively light. Been ridden since dawn. Pumps over there. Ethan nodded toward the water trough on the far side of the yard. Help yourselves. Trading posts closed, though. Wife sick with a fever, not tackin' visitors. The mention of illness was a calculated risk, a frontier deterrent that often kept strangers at bay, especially those with plans to linger. Kane dismounted, signaling his men to follow. As they led their horses to the trough, he approached Ethan, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Between us, mister, we're not looking for just any survivor. There was a girl with that wagon train, brown hair, about 10 years old. Her pa owed us money, lots of it. We're just looking to collect what's ours, maybe take the girl to her kin in Helena. The lie was bold, but Ethan's face remained a mask of indifference. Like I said, Army reported no survivors, he replied, his hand shifting slightly closer to his Colt. If you're looking for debts, try the territorial office in Virginia City. They handle claims for folks who die on the trail. Kane's eyes hardened, a predator scenting resistance. Mind if we look around just to be sure? I mind, Ethan said, his voice cold as a Montana winter. This is private property, and like I said, my wife's sick. Don't need strangers, bring in more trouble. The standoff stretched taut, the air thick with the promise of violence. Kane assessed the situation. Ethan on the porch, Thomas with his rifle partially visible, Joseph now emerging from the barn with a shotgun. The odds were not in the bandits' favor. No offense meant, Kane said finally, backing down with a false smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just trying to do right by family obligations. You understand. He tipped his hat with mocking politeness and rejoined his men, who remounted their horses. Obliged for the water, he called. Maybe we'll come back when your wife's feeling better. Maybe, Ethan replied, not moving until the riders had disappeared down the eastern trail toward Willow Creek. Only then did he signal to Thomas. They'll circle back, he said, his voice low. No way they bought that story. One of them was wearing a red bandana, matches the description of the attackers. Thomas nodded, his expression grim. What's the plan? Get Emily and Clara out of the root cellar, Ethan said, already moving toward the main building. We need to move fast. Those men'll be back after dark, and they're not leaving empty-handed. Inside, Ethan found Clara and Emily emerging from the hidden door beneath the pantry floor, a cramped space used for storing root vegetables and, in times of danger, sheltering those who needed protection. Clara's face was composed, her hands steady despite the strain, but Emily's was pale, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting to see Kane's men peering through the glass. Those were the men, weren't they? Clara asked quietly, her voice steady. The ones who attacked the wagon train. Ethan nodded, his gaze settling on Emily, who stood clutching the journal they had found among her family's belongings. One of them was wearing the red bandana Emily reacted to yesterday. They were fishing for information about survivors. I told them there weren't any, but they didn't believe me. What do we do? Clara asked, her tone that of a woman who had faced hardship before and would face it again without flinching. Ethan knelt before Emily, meeting her frightened eyes with a calm he didn't fully feel. Emily, I need to know if you recognize those men. Were they the ones who attacked your family's wagon train? The girl stared at him for a long moment, her breath shallow, then gave a single, definitive nod. Her small hand reached out, fingers clutching the sleeve of his shirt with desperate intensity, a silent plea that pierced his resolve. They're not attacking you, Ethan said, the words escaping with a fierce certainty that surprised him. But we need to get you somewhere safe until the army can handle this. Emily's grip tightened, her eyes widening with panic at the thought of being sent away. Not alone, Ethan clarified, understanding her fear. I'm going with you. There's an old Blackfoot hunting camp in the hills, where my wife's people used to go. Thomas knows it. It's hidden, defensible. We can reach it before sundown if we leave now. Relief flooded Emily's face, though her fingers remained knotted in his sleeve. Clara, pack food and supplies for 3 days, Ethan instructed, standing. Thomas and Joseph will stay here, keep things looking normal. If those men come back, they need to think we're still here. What about Captain Hayes? Clara asked, already moving toward the kitchen. Shouldn't we send word? No time, Ethan replied. If those men are watching the trails, they'd intercept any messenger. Once we've got Emily safe, Thomas can try to get word to Fort Benton. As Clara hurried to gather provisions, Ethan moved to his bedroom, unlocking the heavy trunk at the foot of his bed. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, were the tools of his former life: a Henry repeating rifle, 2 Colt revolvers, and a skinning knife with a bone handle carved with Blackfoot symbols, a gift from Willow Song's father when Ethan had joined their family. These were the weapons of Ethan Caldwell, the half-Blackfoot scout whose tracking skills had once been the stuff of legend, a man who had walked away from that life when he buried his wife and daughter. He checked and loaded each weapon with hands that remembered every motion, the muscle memory as sharp as the day he'd locked them away. Emily needed more than a trading post owner with a tragic past. She needed the scout, the tracker, the survivor who had once navigated these hills with the precision of a wolf on the hunt. When he emerged, weapons slung across his shoulder, Emily was waiting by the door, a small cloth bag clutched in her hands, her mother's journal and a few possessions Clara had scrounged for her. Her eyes met his, solemn and steady, and for the first time Ethan saw something alongside her fear: trust, complete and unquestioning. The weight of that trust settled on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a call to action, a purpose he hadn't felt since the days when he rode with Willow Song at his side. Within 30 minutes, they were ready to depart. Ethan had chosen 3 reliable horses: Midnight for himself, a gentle mare named Sage for Emily, and a sturdy buckskin named Ranger for Clara. They would travel light, using deer paths and dry creek beds to avoid leaving tracks. Keep her between us, Ethan told Clara as he helped Emily mount. The girl sat stiffly at first, her small hands gripping the saddle horn with white-knuckled intensity. Have you ridden before? Ethan asked, adjusting Sage's stirrups to fit her shorter legs. Emily nodded, though her posture suggested limited experience. Sage is gentle, he assured her, his voice softening. She'll follow Midnight without much guiding. Just hold on and lean with her when she turns. Emily's eyes met his, a flicker of determination breaking through her fear, and she nodded again, more firmly this time. As Ethan mounted midnight, Thomas approached, his expression grim. "I've been thinking about those men," he said quietly, ensuring Emily couldn't hear. The tall one, Kane, something about him seemed familiar. Couple years back, there was talk of a gang working the Missouri River settlements. Leader was a man called Tall Jake, specialized in robbing homesteaders, not just for gold but for land deeds. Army never caught him. Land deeds, Ethan repeated, his mind racing. Emily's father, John Dawson, might have been carrying papers for their new homestead, valuable documents in a territory where water rights and timber stands could make a man rich. That'd explain why they're so hell-bent on finding her. She might know where those papers are hidden, or what they're worth. Makes her twice as valuable to them, Thomas warned, his voice low. And twice as dangerous to keep alive once they get what they want. Ethan's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. They won't get near her. Keep watch here, and if they come back, stall M without raising suspicion. If we're not back in 3 days, get word to Hayes. Thomas clasped Ethan's forearm in the Blackfoot way, a gesture of brotherhood they hadn't shared since the days when Ethan rode as a scout. "Wagon thanka, my friend," Thomas said, invoking the Great Spirit. "Be cautious. Men who hunt for profit are more dangerous than those who hunt for revenge." Ethan returned the clasp, the familiar touch stirring memories of his mother's people, of Willow Song's laughter echoing through these same hills. "Watch over our home, brother," he said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. With a final nod to Joseph, who would maintain the illusion of normal operations, Ethan led their small party toward the western hills, avoiding the main trail and following a narrow game path that wound through a stand of cottonwoods before vanishing into the rocky foothills. The day grew warm as they rode, the late summer sun beating down on the rolling prairie, its golden grasses swaying like a hymn to the land's endurance. Emily sat straighter in her saddle as they traveled, her initial nervousness giving way to a quiet watchfulness. She took in everything, the flight of a red-tailed hawk overhead, the way Ethan paused to check for signs of pursuit, the shift from open grassland to the rugged terrain of the hills. Her silence was no longer just a shield. It was a tool, a way of absorbing the world around her, learning its rhythms as Ethan once had. By midday they reached a small stream, its waters glinting like polished silver under the sun. Ethan called a halt to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of cornbread and jerked venison. Emily dismounted carefully, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed riding, and walked to the stream's edge, kneeling to splash water on her face before drinking from cupped hands. Ethan joined her, filling their canteens when Emily suddenly stiffened, her head snapping toward the eastern horizon. Ethan followed her gaze, seeing nothing but the shimmering heat waves rising from the distant prairie. "What is it?" he asked quietly, his hand resting on the Henry rifle slung across his back. Emily pointed urgently eastward, then mimed the motion of riding, her small hands swift and precise. "Riders," Ethan interpreted, narrowing his eyes as he strained to see what she had noticed. After a moment he caught it, a faint dust cloud, the telltale sign of horses moving at speed across the dry grassland. "Clara," he called softly, keeping his voice low. "We've got company." "Earlier than I expected." Clara joined them at the stream bank, her face showing concern but not panic, her years as a frontier widow having forged a resilience that matched Ethan's own. "How many?" she asked. "Can't tell yet," Ethan said, capping the filled canteens. "But they are moving fast, coming from the direction of the trading post. Either they didn't buy our story, or they decided not to wait for dark." Emily tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with fear, but also a fierce determination. She pointed to the stream, then upstream toward the hills. "Smart girl," Ethan said, a note of approval in his voice. "Water doesn't hold tracks. We'll follow the stream bed as far as we can before cutting into the timber." They remounted quickly, Ethan leading them into the shallow water, where the horses' hooves would leave no prints. As they rode, he mentally mapped their route to the hunting camp, a secluded canyon where Willow Song's grandfather had once led hunts, its narrow entrance and high walls making it a natural fortress. It was a risk, traveling by daylight when they could be spotted, but staying ahead of pursuit was paramount. Emily rode beside him now, her face set in lines of concentration as she managed Sage with growing confidence. There was something in her bearing that reminded Ethan of Starling, not in appearance but in spirit, a stubborn resilience that defied her years. The stream led them into rugged country, the banks rising into steep bluffs dotted with pine and juniper. Ethan scanned constantly for exit points, where they could leave the water without leaving obvious signs. "There," he said finally, pointing to a rocky shelf that jutted into the stream. "We can leave the water there without leaving prints on soft ground." As they made the tricky transition from water to rock, Clara gasped, pointing back the way they had come. On a high ridge about a mile behind them, silhouetted against the sky, were 4 horsemen, their figures stark and ominous. "They're tracking us," Ethan said grimly, his voice low. "And they're good, better than common bandits should be." Emily's face paled, but her jaw set in a determined line as she looked from the distant riders to Ethan, silently asking for their next move. "We need to reach the hunting camp before they find us," Ethan told her, his tone steady despite the tightening in his chest. "It's a few hours' ride, but once we're there, we'll have shelter, water, and a defensible position." He turned to Clara. "From here, the trail gets rough. You up for it?" Clara straightened in her saddle, her eyes flashing with a fire that belied her years. "I wasn't always a housekeeper, Mr. Caldwell. My pa ran freight wagons through Comanche country before I was born. I can ride any trail you lead us on." Her words carried the grit of a woman who had faced down worse than bandits and lived to tell the tale. Ethan allowed himself a brief, approving nod before turning serious again. "Then let's not waste time. Stay close and watch for fallen rocks. We don't want to leave signs for them to follow." As they urged their horses up the steep game trail winding into the hills, Ethan felt the years of trading post life sloughing away like dead skin. With each mile, more of his former self emerged, the instincts honed by years of tracking, the hyper-awareness of a man who had once lived by his wits in this unforgiving land. And with this transformation came a realization that both thrilled and unnerved him. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan Caldwell felt alive, driven by a purpose that burned brighter than the Montana sun. Dusk settled over the Montana hills like a velvet curtain, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain, as Ethan Caldwell led his small party into a narrow canyon flanked by towering walls of weathered sandstone. The Blackfoot hunting camp lay at the canyon's end, a hidden clearing nestled against a cliff that rose like a sentinel against the fading sky. A small spring bubbled from the rock face, feeding a clear pool that shimmered in the twilight before trickling away as a modest stream. The air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the land's ancient endurance, untouched by the greed and violence that plagued the trails below. "We made it," Clara Thompson sighed, her voice heavy with relief as she dismounted from Ranger, her buckskin gelding. Her face bore the strain of the hard ride, hours of navigating rocky trails and dodging pursuit, but her eyes remained sharp, her posture unyielding. She brushed a strand of gray hair from her face, her hands moving with the practicality of a woman who had faced worse than a day's flight and come out stronger. Ethan studied the camp with a scout's critical eye, his mind cataloging its strengths and vulnerabilities. The canyon was defensible, its single entrance a natural choke point, the high walls offering cover from above. But it was also a trap. If Kane's men found them, there was no second exit, no easy retreat. "One way in, one way out," he murmured, more to himself than to Clara as he swung down from midnight, his black stallion snorting softly in the cooling air. Emily Dawson slid from Sage, her legs wobbling after the long hours in the saddle, but she steadied herself against the mare's flank, her small frame radiating a quiet determination. Without hesitation, she moved to the cliff face, her eyes drawn to a series of symbols etched into the stone near the spring, Blackfoot carvings, their lines worn but still legible, speaking of hunts and spirits from generations past. Ethan joined her, his boots crunching on the gravel. "My wife's grandfather made those marks," he explained, his voice softening as he traced the carvings with a calloused finger. "They tell of good huntin' and strong medicine in this place. A sanctuary for those who know its secrets." Emily traced the symbols with her fingertips, her expression solemn, as if communing with the spirits embedded in the stone. Then she turned to Ethan, her eyes posing a silent question, gesturing around the canyon. "Yes, I've been here before," he answered, understanding her unspoken query. "This is where I brought Willow's song when I was courting her. Later, we brought Starling to learn the old ways, how to read the land to honor its gifts." The admission came easier than he expected, the canyon's quiet sanctity loosening the knots of his grief. Speaking of his lost family here felt natural, as if their spirits lingered in the rustle of the pines, watching over this moment. "We need to prepare," Ethan said, snapping back to the present, his voice firm. "They'll be common and soon. Darkness might slow em, but men like Kane don't give up easy." While Clara set about preparing a cold supper, careful to avoid a fire that could betray their position, Ethan began fortifying the camp. He tethered the horses in a natural alcove shielded by overhanging rock, constructed simple alarms of balanced stones at the canyon's entrance, and scouted defensive positions along the high ground. Each action was deliberate, the muscle memory of his scouting days returning like a song he hadn't sung in years. Emily watched his preparations with intense focus, her silence not passive but active, absorbing every detail with the keenness of a student. Then, without warning, she began gathering small branches and rocks, her movements purposeful. Before Ethan could question her, she arranged them on the ground in a crude but recognizable pattern, a map of the canyon and the approach trail, complete with the narrow passage they had crossed earlier. Ethan knelt beside her work, his eyes widening with realization. "You're making a tactical map," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. Emily nodded, then placed 4 small stones on the trail leading to the canyon, her meaning clear. The bandits, 4 of them. She pointed to a tight point in the trail where it squeezed between 2 massive boulders, then made a pushing motion with her hands, mimicking a collapse. "An ambush point," Ethan interpreted, studying the location on her map. "You're suggesting we could trigger a rock slide to block their path?" Emily nodded vigorously, her face alight with fierce intelligence, her eyes burning with a determination that belied her age. It was a plan born of desperation and ingenuity, the kind of thinking that could turn the tide in a fight against overwhelming odds. "That's actually brilliant," Ethan admitted, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "But it's risky. If we're spotted setting it up, we lose our advantage." Emily pointed to herself, then to the boulders on her map, and made a gesture indicating her small size, her hands framing her slight frame. "You think you could set the trap because you're small enough to hide where they wouldn't look?" Ethan translated, his brow furrowing with concern. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Emily's jaw set in a stubborn line. An echo of the defiant starling had shown when challenging her father's authority. She pointed again to herself. Then the boulders, her gesture firm. She was volunteering, not asking permission. Ethan felt a surge of protective fury, his instinct to shield her warring with the practicality of her plan. "She's right, Ethan," Clara said quietly, joining them, her voice steady but laced with understanding. "You're too big to move undetected on that exposed trail, and I'm too old to climb those rocks fast. Emily's small, quick, and she knows what those men are capable of." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his voice low and fierce. "I didn't bring her here to put her in more danger." Emily touched his arm, drawing his attention, her eyes meeting his with a resolve that stopped him cold. There was no fear in her gaze, only determination and something deeper, a need to fight back, to reclaim some measure of control from the men who had shattered her world. Ethan recognized that need, a mirror to the relentless drive that had fueled him after losing Willow's song and Starling, until exhaustion had buried it beneath years of resignation. "You understand what you're volunteering for?" he asked, his voice serious, treating her not as a child but as a partner in their survival. "It's not just dangerous. If they catch you," Emily nodded solemnly, her eyes unwavering. She knew the stakes, perhaps better than he did. After a long moment, Ethan sighed, his shoulders sagging with reluctant acceptance. "We'll go together before first light. Set the trap, then get back here before they reach that point in the trail." Emily's relief was palpable, not because she had won an argument, but because Ethan had acknowledged her as a participant in their defense, not just a victim to be protected. Her small hand lingered on his arm, a silent thank you that carried more weight than words. That night, as Emily slept fitfully near the spring, wrapped in blankets against the canyon's chill, Ethan kept watch at the entrance, his Henry rifle across his knees. Clara joined him, her shotgun close at hand, her presence a steady anchor in the gathering dark. "She reminds me of Starling," Clara said softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind through the pines. "Same spirit, same stubbornness." Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the trail beyond the canyon. "It's more than that. She's whacking something in me I thought was dead." His admission was raw, a confession he hadn't planned to make, but the canyon's quiet seemed to demand truth. Clara's eyes were knowing in the moonlight. "She's healing you, Ethan. I've seen more life in you these past few days than in 5 years of living under your roof." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Or maybe she's just reopening old wounds." "Maybe both," Ethan countered, though the words lacked conviction. Clara's observation settled into him like a stone in still water, stirring ripples he couldn't ignore. "Wounds need reopening sometimes to heal right," Clara said, her voice gentle but firm. "You buried your grief with Willow's song and Starling, never given yourself a chance to mend proper." Ethan didn't reply, his gaze distant but her words echoed in the silence. What would he do when this was over? The question Clara posed next caught him off guard. "If we survive this, what do you want, Ethan? For yourself, for her?" The question pierced him, a challenge to confront desires he had long suppressed. For 5 years, wanting anything had felt like inviting loss, a betrayal of the family he had failed to protect. Before he could answer, a faint sound from the canyon entrance snapped his attention back to the present. Rising silently, rifle ready, he moved to investigate. In the pale moonlight, he spotted movement, not humans, but a small herd of mule deer passing along the trail, their hooves soft on the earth. A false alarm, but a reminder that dawn was approaching, bringing with it the need for action. When he returned to the camp, Emily was awake, sitting up with her mother's journal clutched to her chest like a talisman. Her eyes followed him, wide and alert despite the late hour. "Just dear," he assured her, settling back into his watch position. "Get some rest. We move before dawn." Instead of lying down, Emily opened the journal, turning to a specific page with deliberate care. She held it out to Ethan, pointing insistently at a passage written in Abigail Dawson's neat hand. The moonlight was just bright enough for him to read. "John secured our claim today, 320 acres along Cottonwood Creek, with water rights and a timber stand. The deed is sewn into the lining of Emily's coat, along with our savings. Better safe than sorry on these dangerous trails, *. Ethan looked up, meeting Emily's intent gaze. "The deed to your family's land," he said, the pieces falling into place. "That's what they are after. That's why they killed everyone and why they're hunting you so hard." Emily nodded, then pointed to Ethan to herself and made a questioning gesture. What would he do with her after this? "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, his voice heavy with honesty. "But first, we need to survive the night and the morning to come." Emily's expression didn't change, but her nod was resolute, a silent agreement to face the danger together. With the first hint of dawn, Ethan and Emily set out for the ambush point she had identified on her map. They moved silently, Ethan impressed by how quickly Emily adapted to the wilderness terrain, her small frame slipping through the underbrush with the stealth of a fox. At the narrow passage between the towering boulders, they found exactly what Emily had anticipated, a precarious stack of rocks that, with careful preparation, could be triggered to slide across the trail, blocking or crushing anyone caught in its path. Using hand signals to communicate, they worked swiftly. Ethan rigged a deadfall mechanism, a taut rope and balanced stone that would release the avalanche when disturbed, while Emily gathered smaller rocks to bolster the larger ones, her hands steady despite the danger. They were nearly finished when Emily froze, her head cocked, listening. A moment later, Ethan heard it too, the distant clatter of hooves, the bandits moving up the trail faster than expected, likely traveling through the night to close the gap. "Back to camp," Ethan whispered urgently, grabbing Emily's arm. Now, they moved swiftly but carefully, avoiding exposed sections of the trail, their breaths shallow in the pre-dawn chill. When they reached the canyon, Clara was already alert, her belongings packed, the horses saddled. "They are common," Ethan confirmed, his voice tight. "Sooner than we planned. No time to get to the high ground and trigger the rock slide from safety." Emily's face fell, her carefully laid plan now useless without someone to spring it at the critical moment. Ethan's mind raced, recalculating their options. "New plan," he decided, his voice firm. "Clara, take Emily and the horses deeper into the canyon, behind that rock formation. Stay hidden, no matter what you hear." "And you?" Clara asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "I'll trigger the rock slide," Ethan said, checking the Henry rifle's magazine. "With luck, it'll stop at least some of them. Any that make it through, I'll handle." Emily shook her head violently, grabbing his arm with desperate intensity, her eyes pleading for him to reconsider. "I'm not asking, Emily," Ethan said firmly, kneeling to meet her gaze. "This is how it has to be. Those men don't get to take another child's family, not while I'm alive." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she released his arm, her face a mixture of fear and resignation. She understood, even if she hated it. "Go now," Ethan instructed, his voice softening. "And Emily, if I don't come back, give the journal to Captain Hayes. He'll make sure your family's land goes to you, not those murderers." As Clara led Emily and the horses behind the rock formation, Ethan checked his weapons one final time, the Henry with 16 rounds, 2 Colt revolvers fully loaded, the Blackfoot knife at his belt. Moving silently to a position overlooking the ambush point, he settled into a crouch, the sounds of approaching horses growing clearer, 4 riders, moving with the confidence of men who believed their prey was cornered. As the first rider came into view, the pockmarked man from the trading post, Ethan felt a calm settle over him, the familiar focus of a hunter preparing to protect what was his. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan Caldwell had something worth fighting for, a purpose that burned brighter than the dawn creeping over the Montana hills. The Montana dawn crept over the canyon's rim, painting the sandstone walls in hues of crimson and gold. But for Ethan Caldwell, the world had narrowed to the narrow passage below, where 4 riders approached with the relentless precision of wolves closing on a wounded elk. He crouched behind a jagged outcrop, the Henry rifle steady in his hands, its walnut stock cool against his cheek. The air was thick with the scent of dust and pine, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clatter of hooves and the occasional snort of a horse. Ethan's heart beat a steady rhythm, not with fear but with the calm focus of a man who had once lived for moments like this, a scout, a protector, a survivor forged in the crucible of the frontier. The bandits entered the kill zone, the tight passage between the towering boulders where Emily's rock slide trap lay primed. The pockmarked man led, his eyes scanning the trail with a predator's caution, followed by the nervous youth, whose twitchy hands betrayed his inexperience. Jacob Kane and the man with the red bandana brought up the rear, their postures relaxed but alert, their revolvers glinting in the early light. Ethan's finger rested on the trigger, not aimed at the men but at the deadfall mechanism, a taut rope and balanced stone that would unleash a cascade of rock and earth. He waited, breath shallow, until all 4 riders were within the trap's embrace, their horses' hooves stirring clouds of dust that shimmered like a mirage. These were not common thieves, Ethan realized, noting the military precision in their spacing, the way they checked high points along the trail. Kane's gang operated with the discipline of trained soldiers, a fact that made them all the more dangerous. He steadied his aim, the crosshairs fixed on the deadfall's anchor. One shot, one chance to bury the threat before it reached the canyon where Emily and Clara hid. The pockmarked man's horse stepped forward, inches from the trigger point, and Ethan squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Henry echoed through the canyon, a gunshot that seemed to split the morning in 2. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, the world suspended in silence. Then the earth roared, a torrent of rocks and debris thundering down the slope in a gray avalanche. The pockmarked man looked up, his scream swallowed as tons of stone crashed onto the trail, engulfing him and his horse in a cloud of dust. The nervous youth vanished beneath the slide, his cry cut short, his mount buried in the chaos. Kane and the red bandana man, riding at the rear, yanked their horses back just in time, stones bouncing harmlessly around them as the main avalanche sealed the passage, a wall of rubble cutting them off from their companions. Kane's face contorted with fury, his eyes scanning the high ground until they locked onto Ethan's position. "Caldwell," he bellowed, drawing his revolver with a speed that spoke of years on the wrong side of the law. "You're a dead man." Bullets whined past Ethan, splintering rock as he slid down a scree slope to better cover, returning fire with the Henry to keep Kane and his surviving partner pinned down. "You don't know what you're tangled in," Kane shouted, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "That girl's got something that belongs to us." He ducked behind his horse, using the animal as a shield, a coward's tactic but effective. Ethan gritted his teeth, unable to risk hitting the horse, his shots forcing Kane to stay low. "She's got nothing that's yours," Ethan called back, circling to gain a better angle. "Neither did her parents when you butchered em." A bullet grazed the boulder near his head, forcing him back into cover. The red bandana man was working his way up the canyon wall, attempting to flank him, his movements silent and deliberate. Ethan's concern deepened. Kane's steady fire kept him pinned, while the second man's maneuver threatened to turn the fight against him. "You think this is about robbery?" Kane laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "That deed she's carrying is worth more than gold, Caldwell. Water rights for all of Cottonwood Creek, thousands of acres of prime grazing land." The revelation confirmed Ethan's suspicions, a grim truth laid bare in the heat of battle. This was no simple raid. It was land theft, a scheme as old as the frontier itself. Kill settlers, steal their deeds, forge new papers with corrupt officials in Virginia City. Such plots thrived in the lawless territories, and Emily's family had paid the ultimate price. Ethan moved swiftly between boulders, staying low, his mind racing. The red bandana man had vanished from view, a dangerous unknown that heightened the stakes. He needed to end this before they could bypass the rock slide and reach the canyon. A faint scuffing to his right gave him a split-second warning before the red bandana man lunged from behind a boulder, his Bowie knife flashing in the dawn light. Ethan twisted away, the blade slicing through his coat sleeve, grazing his arm in a hot line of pain. He countered with the Henry's butt, slamming it into the bandit's jaw with a crack that echoed like a snapped branch. The man staggered, blood streaming from his split lip, but he didn't fall, circling Ethan with the wary stance of a seasoned fighter, knife held low. "That girl saw our faces," the bandit growled, his voice thick with venom. "She can identify us. She dies today, just like her family." The words ignited something cold and lethal in Ethan, a killing instinct honed during the border wars, when he had tracked renegades through these same hills. This man had helped slaughter an entire wagon train, would murder a child to cover his crimes, and now threatened the fragile new life Ethan was beginning to imagine. When the bandit lunged again, Ethan was ready. He sidestepped, his Blackfoot knife flashing in a swift arc that opened the man's throat in a spray of crimson. The bandit fell, clutching his neck, his eyes wide with shock as life bled out onto the canyon floor. "Jenkins," Kane called, unaware of his companion's fate, his voice sharp with impatience. "You get him." Ethan retrieved his rifle, moving to a new position, keeping low. Kane was still behind the horses, his revolver barking as he maintained a steady barrage. The standoff stretched, neither man able to land a clean shot, but Ethan's concern grew with each passing minute. If this dragged on, Clara and Emily would be vulnerable, hidden but not safe. He needed to draw Kane out, to end this before the bandit could regroup or call for reinforcements. A wild gamble formed in his mind, risky but potentially decisive. "I know who you are, Kane," Ethan shouted, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "Or should I say Captain Jacob Kane, formerly of the 6th Cavalry, cashiered for stealing army supplies, if the wanted posters are right." A surprised curse from Kane told Ethan his shot in the dark had hit home. "The Army's been hunting you since that supply train robbery in '77, Ethan continued, improvising to keep Kane off balance. "Captain Hazel, be mighty interested to know you've taken to murdering settlers." "Hayes is a fool," Kane spat, his voice closer now, betraying his movement. "And you're a dead man talking." Ethan had been inching toward a position that would give him a clear line of retreat to the canyon, his words a distraction to cover his maneuver. "The girl's already gone," he lied, his voice steady. "Sent her with my Blackfoot men to Fort Benton at dawn. Those land deeds are in Hayes's hands by now." Kane's response was a furious barrage of gunfire, bullets chewing into the rocks around Ethan, forcing him to duck lower. When the shooting paused, Kane's voice rang out, closer still, laced with menace. "You're lying, Caldwell. That girl don't leave your side. We've been watching your trading post for days. She trusts only you." The admission sent a chill through Ethan. They had been observed, their movements studied, their vulnerabilities mapped. These were no impulsive killers. They were calculating predators, and Emily was their prize. "After today," Kane continued, his voice shifting as he sought a better angle, "she'll be dead just like you, just like her family. Once I have those deeds, I own the best water rights in the territory. Not even the governor'll stand in my way." A flash of movement caught Ethan's eye, Kane breaking cover, dashing for a boulder that would give him a clear shot. Ethan brought up the Henry in one fluid motion, squeezing the trigger as the bandit dove for shelter. The shot went wide, splintering rock where Kane had been a split second before. Ethan cursed under his breath, his chance lost. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the air, distinct from the revolver's bark. Kane jerked upright, his face frozen in shock, a red stain blossoming across his chest. He staggered, clutching the wound, as another shot rang out, this one dropping him to the ground, his revolver clattering into the dust. Ethan spun toward the source of the gunfire, his rifle raised, only to see Captain Daniel Hayes standing at the canyon's entrance, his Springfield rifle still smoking, flanked by 6 Army soldiers with weapons at the ready. "Caldwell," Hayes called, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "You and the girl all right?" Relief washed through Ethan, though his body remained taut, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He straightened from his cover, wincing as he felt a burning pain in his arm, where the red bandana man's knife had sliced through his coat. Blood seeped through the torn fabric, a minor wound but a reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. "We're alive," Ethan replied, his voice rough. "Emily and Clara are farther up the canyon." Hayes approached, his young face grim as he surveyed the bodies of the bandits, his soldiers fanning out to secure the area. "Thomas rode into Fort Benton at dawn," Hayes explained, holstering his rifle. "Said you needed help, that the men who hit the Dawson wagon train had tracked you here." Ethan nodded, the pieces falling into place. Thomas's quick thinking had saved them, his loyalty a bridge across the years of Ethan's self-imposed isolation. As a young soldier applied a field dressing to his arm, Ethan recounted the morning's events, the rock slide, the fight, and Kane's revelation about the land deed hidden in Emily's coat. "It's about land fraud," he said, his voice low. "Kane wanted the water rights to Cottonwood Creek. Killed the Dawsons to steal their claim." "Not surprised," Hayes said, his expression hardening. "Land fraud's a plague in the territory." Kane's description matches a man wanted for similar crimes in Wyoming. Captain Jacob Kane, like you said, drummed out of the Army for theft, turned to worse sins since. He paused, studying Ethan with a mix of respect and concern. "You took a hell of a risk facing them alone." "Not alone," Ethan corrected quietly, his thoughts turning to Emily and Clara, hidden behind the rocks deeper in the canyon. "Not anymore." The words carried a weight he hadn't anticipated, an acknowledgement of the bond forming between him and the girl who had stumbled into his life. When they reached the rock formation, Ethan found Emily standing alert, Clara's shotgun clutched in her small hands, her face set in a fierce determination to defend herself if needed. The sight struck him like a thunderbolt. This child, who had lost everything, had found the courage to stand her ground, a rifle too big for her frame held with unwavering resolve. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ethan's bandaged arm, and she dropped the shotgun, running to him with a speed that belied her exhaustion. For the first time since her arrival at the trading post, Emily threw her arms around Ethan's waist, burying her face against his chest in a fierce embrace that spoke of relief and trust. "It's over," Ethan told her, his voice awkward but gentle as he returned the hug with his uninjured arm. "They can't hurt you anymore." Emily looked up at him, then past him to where Hayes and his men stood, her expression wary until Ethan nodded reassurance. "Captain Hayes is a friend," he explained. "He'll make sure your family's land claim is protected. Those men won't bother you again." Hayes approached slowly, removing his cavalry hat as he addressed Emily, his tone respectful. "Miss Dawson, I'm deeply sorry about your family. Rest assured justice was served today." He glanced at Ethan, a faint smile breaking through his grim demeanor. "Thanks in large part to Mr. Caldwell here." Emily's grip on Ethan tightened, and she looked up at him with a question in her eyes, the same question Clara had posed the night before, the one that had haunted Ethan since Hayes first brought her to the trading post. What would happen to her now? For the first time in 5 years, Ethan felt a flicker of clarity, a sense of what he wanted, not just for her but for himself. But the moment was too raw, the dust of battle still settling, and he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate need to return to safety. As the soldiers cleared the bodies and prepared to escort them back to the trading post, Ethan led Emily to Sage, helping her mount with a gentleness that felt foreign after the morning's violence. Clara, her face etched with fatigue but unbowed, took Ranger's reins, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. "You did good, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who had seen him at his lowest and now saw something new. "You gave her a chance." Ethan didn't reply, but the words settled into him, a seed planted in soil long left fallow. As they rode out of the canyon, the sun now high above the Montana hills, Emily rode close to him, her mother's journal tucked safely in her saddlebag, the deed to Cottonwood Creek a tangible link to her past and a promise for her future. The journey back to the trading post was quiet, the weight of the morning's events hanging over them like a storm cloud that had finally broken, leaving clear skies in its wake. When they reached the trading post, Thomas and Joseph were waiting, their faces a mixture of relief and pride as they saw Ethan, Clara, and Emily return unharmed. The main building stood as steadfast as ever, its log walls a testament to the life Ethan had built from the ashes of loss. But as he dismounted and helped Emily down, he noticed a change in her, a subtle shift in her posture, a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was still silent, her voice locked away by trauma, but her presence was no longer that of a ghost. She was a survivor like him, and in her resilience, Ethan saw a mirror of his own. That evening, as the trading post settled into its familiar rhythms, Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of fire and shadow. Emily joined him, her small frame wrapped in a quilt, her mother's journal in her hands. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough, a quiet affirmation of the bond they were forging, fragile but growing stronger with each shared moment. "Winter's common," Ethan observed, his voice low, breaking the silence. "Thomas says it'll be a hard one." Emily nodded, then pulled a small notebook from her pocket, a gift from Clara to encourage her to write, to find a voice in the absence of words. She scribbled something and showed it to Ethan. "I'm not afraid of winter anymore." "Not here." Ethan's lips curved in a rare faint smile. "No," he agreed. "We'll be fine here." Emily hesitated, then wrote again, her pencil moving with careful deliberation. "When will I talk again? Sometimes I try, but no words come out." It was the first time she had addressed her silence directly, a vulnerability that struck Ethan with its raw honesty. The Army doctor at Fort Benton had warned that her trauma might keep her voice locked away for months, years, or forever. But Ethan saw in her eyes a determination that defied such prognoses. "The words'll come when they are ready," he told her, his voice steady. "You're doin' fine, Mackin yourself understood. Some folks talk too much anyway." Emily's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, and she wrote one final message. Will you tell me about Willow's song and Starling tonight? You never finished their stories, The request stirred a pang in Ethan's chest, but it was different now, a sweet sorrow rather than the raw grief that had once consumed him. "Yes," he said, his voice softening. "I think it's time you heard the whole story." As dusk deepened, Clara lit the lamps inside, their warm glow spilling through the windows, a beacon against the gathering dark. From the bunkhouse, the sound of Thomas's flute drifted on the evening air, a traditional Blackfoot melody that spoke of survival, of homecoming after a long journey. Emily slipped her small hand into Ethan's, a gesture that would have been unthinkable days ago, when fear had kept her at arm's length from the world. Now it felt natural, a connection between two souls who had found each other in the wilderness of loss. "You know," Ethan said quietly, his eyes on the horizon, "Willow's song believed that souls travel together across many lives. When you recognize someone right away, it means you've met before, in another time." Emily looked up at him, her eyes questioning. "When Hayes brought you here," Ethan continued, "something in me knew you even though I fought it. Not as Willow's song or Starling reborn, you're your own person, with your own path. But as someone my soul needed to protect." Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had saved them both. "The Blackfoot have a say-in," Ethan said, his voice softening as he looked out over the land that had once been a place of exile and was now a home once more. Midakui Oyasin we are all related. Family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's who finds you when you're lost." As they turned to go inside, where Clara waited with supper and the comfort of routine, Ethan felt a weight lift, a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Emily at his side, a daughter not of blood but of spirit, a gift from a land that took much but sometimes gave back in unexpected ways. Autumn swept across the Montana territory like a painter's brush, transforming the prairie into a tapestry of gold and russet, the air crisp with the promise of winter. 3 months had passed since the deadly confrontation in the canyon, 3 months of healing, justice, and quiet transformation at the Caldwell trading post. The log walls of the main building gleamed with fresh paint, a labor of love undertaken by Thomas Red Elk and Joseph Swift Fox, who had declared the old weathered facade no longer fit for a home reborn. New fencing enclosed an expanded garden, where Clara Thompson's vegetables thrived in defiance of the shortening days, and a small stable had been erected near the creek, its timbers still fragrant with the scent of fresh-cut pine. The trading post was no longer just a waypoint for travelers. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the family forged in the crucible of shared tragedy. Ethan Caldwell stood in the yard, wiping sweat from his brow as he stacked firewood for the coming cold. The scar on his arm, a jagged reminder of the red bandana man's knife, had faded to a pale line, but the deeper change was in his bearing. He stood taller, moved with purpose, his hazel eyes no longer shadowed by the bitterness that had defined him for 5 years. The grief for Willow's song and Starling remained, a quiet ache that would never fully fade, but it had been joined by something new, a spark of hope, kindled by the girl who had arrived as a stranger and was now something far more. Clara emerged from the main building, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun as a wagon approached along the trail from Willow Creek. Her weathered face broke into a rare smile as she recognized the visitors. "Ethan," she called toward the storehouse, where he had moved to check supplies. "Captain Hayes is here." Ethan stepped into the sunlight, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression calm but curious. "Didn't expect him till tomorrow," he said, striding toward the yard as Captain Daniel Hayes helped a woman down from the wagon. The past months had solidified Hayes's role as an ally, his fairness in dealing with settlers and Blackfoot alike earning Ethan's respect. "Thought you'd want this news pronto," Hayes said, removing his cavalry hat, his young face alight with satisfaction. The territorial court in Virginia cities officially recognized Emily's claim to the Dawson homestead. Judge Harlan signed the papers yesterday. Ethan accepted the envelope Hayes handed him, its territorial seal a symbol of hard-won justice. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward the trading post. "Clara's got apple pie coolin' on the windowsill, and I reckon she'll share if you ask nice." Clara huffed, her stern demeanor a thin veil over her hospitality. "As if I'd let good pie go to waste," she said, leading the way into the main room, where the air was warm with the scent of baked apples and coffee. The main room had undergone subtle but profound changes in the months since the canyon. The charcoal sketch of Ethan with Willow's song and starling still hung in its place of honor, a touchstone of memory, but it was no longer alone. New drawings adorned the walls, rendered in a child's improving hand. Thomas teaching a small figure to fish by the creek, Clara standing proudly beside her flourishing garden, and a detailed view of the trading post itself, its log walls bathed in sunlight. These were Emily's creations, her silent voice finding expression in pencil and paper, capturing the life she was building among them. As Clara served coffee and generous slices of pie, Hayes introduced his companion, a young widow named Sarah Mitchell, who taught at the schoolhouse in Willow Creek. "Miss Mitchell's offered to tutor Emily," Hayes explained, glancing at Ethan. "With your permission, of course." "She needs proper schoolin'," Ethan agreed, his voice steady. "Though she's learnin' fast already." The soft creak of the porch door interrupted them, and Emily entered, carrying a basket of late-season wildflowers, goldenrod and aster, their vibrant hues a contrast to the fading prairie. She stopped short at the sight of visitors, her expression momentarily guarded, then softened into a smile of recognition. 3 months had transformed her from the traumatized, silent child who had arrived at the trading post. Her face had filled out, her dark hair neatly braided with a beaded band in the Blackfoot style, a gift from Thomas's sister. Her deep blue dress, sewn by Clara, fit her growing frame, and her eyes, once haunted, now sparkled with curiosity and quiet confidence. "Emily," Ethan said, his voice warm but measured, "Captain Hayes has news about your family's land. And this is Miss Mitchell, from the school in Willow Creek." Emily set down her basket and approached the table, her movements graceful, a far cry from the trembling girl who had flinched at every touch. She nodded politely to Hayes, then studied Sarah Mitchell with frank curiosity, her gaze assessing but not unfriendly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily," Sarah said, her voice warm and genuine, like the schoolteachers Ethan remembered from his own childhood in a Missouri trading town. "Captain Hayes tells me you've been drawing. I'd love to see your work." Emily glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement, a silent signal of trust. She retrieved a small leather folder from a shelf and laid out several drawings on the table, landscapes of the Montana hills, portraits of the trading post's inhabitants, and meticulous sketches of plants and animals she had observed, each line infused with a keen eye for detail. "These are remarkable," Sarah exclaimed, her enthusiasm unfeigned. "You have a real talent, Emily." The girl's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise, a rare moment of self-consciousness. She took a seat at the table, accepting a slice of pie from Clara with a small nod of thanks. The court proceedings went smooth as we hoped, Hayes continued, addressing Ethan but including Emily in his gaze. With the deed from Emily's coat and her mother's journal as evidence, there was no question of her rightful claim. The property will be held in trust till she comes of age. Emily listened intently, her eyes moving between Hayes and Ethan, her silence attentive rather than withdrawn. Hayes leaned forward, his tone turning serious. The investigation into Kane and his gangs uncovered a wider conspiracy: corrupt land officials, forged documents, multiple murders. The governors ordered a full review of all territorial land grants from the past 3 years. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. Good. That land should go to folks who work it, not thieves and killers. As they discussed the legal aftermath, Emily quietly rose and moved to a small trunk near the fireplace, her movements deliberate. She returned with a folded paper, placing it before Ethan with a careful hand. He recognized the paper from her mother's journal, now covered with Emily's neat handwriting. Unfolding it, he read her message: I want to visit my family's land next spring. Will you take me? I need to say goodbye properly, but I want to come home to the trading post afterward with you and Clara and Thomas. Ethan looked up, meeting Emily's gaze, her eyes a mixture of determination and vulnerability. The 3 months since the canyon had been a provisional arrangement, a time of healing while the legal matters were settled. Now she was asking for something permanent, a place in the family they were building. Of course we'll visit your family's land, he said carefully, his voice steady. You should see what you'll inherit when you're grown. We can plant something there to remember him by. Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on him, waiting for the answer to her unspoken question. Ethan felt the weight of Clara's and Hayes's gazes, their silence a quiet expectation. Sarah Mitchell, sensing the emotional undercurrent, busied herself with Emily's drawings, giving them space. As for the rest, Ethan continued, his voice softening, this is your home for as long as you want it to be. That was never in question. The simple declaration seemed to release a tension in Emily, her shoulders relaxing as a full, genuine smile transformed her solemn face into that of a normal 11-year-old, secure in the knowledge that she belonged. Later, after Hayes and Sarah had departed, arrangements made for twice-weekly tutoring sessions, Ethan stood on the porch, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the prairie. Emily joined him, leaning against the railing in a posture that mirrored his own, her quilt draped over her shoulders against the evening chill. The quiet between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that needed no words. Winter's common, Ethan repeated, his voice a low rumble. Gonna be a hard one, Thomas says. Emily nodded, pulling out her notebook and writing swiftly. I'm not afraid of winter anymore. Not here, she paused, then added, her pencil moving with careful deliberation. When will I talk again? Sometimes I try, but no words come out. The question, raw and vulnerable, struck Ethan with its honesty, a window into the struggle she carried beneath her growing strength. The words'll come when they are ready, Ethan said, his voice gentle but firm, echoing the reassurance he had offered before. You're doing fine as is. Some folks could learn from your quiet. Emily's lips curved in a faint smile, and she wrote again, will you tell me about Willow's song and Starling tonight? You promised, The request stirred the familiar ache, but it was softer now, tempered by the life they were building. I did, Ethan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Let's go inside. Clara's got supper waitin', and I'll tell you their stories, everyone I can remember. As they turned toward the door, Emily paused on the threshold, her small frame silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from within. She looked up at Ethan, took a deep breath, and shaped her mouth around a single word, her voice rusty from disuse but clear as a bell in the evening air. "Home," she whispered, the sound barely audible but unmistakable, a milestone that stopped Ethan in his tracks. His throat tightened, and he nodded, unable to speak for a moment, the weight of her trust settling over him like a warm blanket. "Yes," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Home." Together, they stepped inside, closing the door against the gathering darkness as the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, a silent promise of new beginnings in a land that had tested them and found them worthy. Spring burst across the Montana territory with a vibrancy that seemed to defy the harshness of the land, transforming the winter-brown prairie into a sea of green, dotted with wildflowers in shades of violet and gold. The creeks swelled with snowmelt, their waters glinting like polished silver under the April sun, and the air hummed with the songs of migratory birds returning to the hills. True to his promise, Ethan Caldwell prepared for the journey to the Dawson homestead, a 320-acre claim along Cottonwood Creek that represented both a lost dream and a legacy for Emily Dawson. The trip was more than a pilgrimage. It was a chance for Emily to say goodbye to her parents, John and Abigail, and to plant roots for the future she was building with her new family. Ethan, Emily, and Thomas Red Elk set out at dawn, their horses loaded with supplies and 2 young cottonwood saplings, carefully wrapped to survive the journey. Ethan rode midnight, his black stallion, his weathered face calm but watchful, the Henry rifle slung across his back a quiet reminder of the dangers that still lingered in the territory. Emily rode sage, her posture confident now, the months of riding lessons with Thomas paying off in her steady hands and easy balance. Thomas, on his sturdy paint mare, Willow, served as guide and protector, his Blackfoot knowledge of the land ensuring they avoided well-traveled trails where trouble might lurk. Clara Thompson remained at the trading post, her practical wisdom entrusted with keeping operations smooth in their absence, though she had packed enough food, cornbread, dried venison, and her famous apple preserves to feed a small army. The journey took 2 days, a leisurely pace that allowed Emily to absorb the changing landscape, her dark eyes taking in the rolling hills, the distant peaks of the Absaroka Range, and the occasional glimpse of antelope bounding through the grass. She was no longer the silent, traumatized child who had arrived at the trading post, her voice still rare but her presence vibrant, her notebook filled with sketches and questions about the land. "What's that flower?" she wrote at one point, pointing to a cluster of purple lupines. Thomas, ever patient, explained their Blackfoot name and medicinal uses, his deep voice weaving stories of his people's connection to the earth. Ethan watched the exchange, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. Emily was learning, growing, becoming part of this world in a way he hadn't dared hope. The evening before their arrival, they camped beside a small stream, the fire casting a warm glow against the twilight. Thomas played his flute, the haunting notes of a Blackfoot melody drifting into the night, a song of renewal that seemed to resonate with the purpose of their journey. Emily sat beside Ethan, her notebook open, sketching the firelight's dance on the water. She paused, then wrote, her pencil moving with deliberate care. Asterisk, will it hurt to see their land? I want to remember them, but I'm scared it'll make me sad again. Asterisk. Ethan read the note, his heart tightening at her honesty. It might hurt, he said, his voice low and steady, like the creek's gentle flow. Saying goodbye ain't easy, but it's part of healing. You're not forgetting em, you're honoring em, giving their dreams a place to live on. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and leaned against him, her small frame seeking the comfort of his presence. Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder, the gesture awkward but heartfelt, a silent promise that she wouldn't face this alone. They reached the Dawson homestead at midday, the land stretching before them in a gentle sweep of prairie bisected by Cottonwood Creek, its waters sparkling under the sun. A small stand of timber crowned the northern boundary, its dark green a contrast to the open grassland. The claim was unmarked by human hands, save for the surveyor's stakes that outlined its borders, yet it hummed with potential, the kind of land that had drawn families like the Dawsons west with dreams of a new life. Ethan dismounted, helping Emily down from Sage, her movements slow as she took in the sight of what would have been her family's home. Emily walked forward, her boots sinking into the rich black soil, her eyes tracing the horizon as if seeing the ghost of her parents' vision. A sturdy farmhouse, a barn, fields of wheat swaying in the breeze. Ethan and Thomas hung back, giving her space to process the moment, their presence a quiet anchor. After a time, Emily beckoned them forward, pointing to a low rise overlooking the creek. "Here," she said, her voice soft but growing stronger with each use, a miracle Ethan never took for granted. "This is where they wanted the house." Ethan nodded, assessing the site with a scout's eye. It was a fine location, sheltered from the north wind by the timber stand, with good drainage and a clear view in all directions. "Your pa chose well," he said, his voice warm with approval. "This is prime land, Emily. Worth fighting for." The words carried a double meaning, a nod to the battle they had waged to protect her claim and the life they were building together. Emily knelt, running her fingers through the soil, her touch reverent, as if greeting the land her parents had loved. "We can plant the trees now," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "One for Ma, one for Pa." They had brought the cottonwood saplings to honor John and Abigail, a living memorial to their dreams. Thomas dug the holes, his strong hands making quick work of the earth, while Emily prepared the ground, loosening the soil with a small trowel Clara had packed. Ethan secured the saplings with stakes and rope, protecting them from the prairie winds that could snap their slender trunks. When the trees were planted, side by side on the rise, Emily stood between them, her hands resting on each sapling, her dark hair catching the sunlight. "I'll come back," she promised, speaking directly to the trees as if they could hear her, her voice clear and resolute. "When I'm grown, I'll build the house you wanted. Maybe not to live here always, but to visit, so you'll know your dreams ain't forgotten." The words were a vow, a bridge between her past and her future, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat, humbled by her wisdom at just 11 years old. Thomas stepped forward, placing a small bundle of sage at the base of each tree, a Blackfoot tradition to bless the land and honor the spirits. "The earth remembers," he said, his voice deep and reverent. "Your parents' love is in this place, Emily, and now it's in you." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening, and reached out to touch the sage, her fingers lingering on the fragrant leaves. That night they camped on the homestead, a small fire warding off the spring chill as the stars blazed overhead, a celestial canopy that seemed to watch over their quiet vigil. Thomas played his flute again, the notes weaving a story of loss and renewal, while Emily sat close to Ethan, her notebook open but untouched, her thoughts too deep for words. "When we get home," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, her voice stronger now, "I want to learn to ride like Thomas and to shoot." Her tone was firm, a declaration of intent that caught Ethan off guard. "Shoot?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Emily nodded, her jaw set. "If I'm gonna be part of this family, I need to know how to protect our home, like you protected me." Her words echoed the resolve she had shown in the canyon, when she had insisted on helping set the rock slide trap, and Ethan felt a surge of pride mingled with responsibility. He exchanged a glance with Thomas, who nodded, a rare smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. "Your pa was the best shot in 3 territories," Thomas said, his voice warm. If you're gonna learn, you learn from him. Emily's eyes lit up, and she turned to Thomas, her voice eager. And you'll teach me Blackfoot words, and how to read tracks and which plants are medicine. Slow down, Ethan chuckled, the sound rare and genuine, a reminder of the man he had been before grief had silenced his laughter. We got time for all that. Years, Emily. The simple truth hung between them, the luxury of time, a future stretching out like the prairie itself, filled with possibilities they hadn't dared imagine months ago. Emily fell silent, contemplating the weight of those years, then spoke again, her voice softer but no less serious. There's something I need to ask you both. About my name. Ethan and Thomas leaned in, their attention absolute as Emily gathered her thoughts. I want to be Emily Caldwell, she began, her words deliberate, but I don't want to forget I was Emily Dawson first. My parents gave me that name. Ethan's heart swelled, the question catching him unprepared but resonating with a truth he had been circling since the canyon. You don't have to choose, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You can honor both families. Your parents' name is part of you, just like this land is. But you're also part of us now, if that's what you want. Emily nodded, relief softening her features. Emily Dawson Caldwell, she said, testing the sound, her voice gaining strength. That feels right, Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling with approval. In Blackfoot tradition, names change as a person grows, marking new beginnings. Your name carries both your past and your future, Emily. It's a good name. Ethan felt a profound tenderness at her choice, a recognition of the family they were becoming. I was born Ethan Carter, he said, sharing a piece of his own story, prompted by the moment's intimacy. My pa was a white trader, my ma Blackfoot. When I married Willow Song, her father gave me the name Caldwell to mark my place in their family. So I carry two names too. Emily's eyes widened, a spark of connection lighting her face. Both names are part of who I am, Ethan continued, just like yours are part of you. As the fire burned low, Emily dozed off, wrapped in a blanket beside the creek, her face peaceful under the starlight. Ethan and Thomas sat in companionable silence, keeping watch over the sleeping girl and the land that would someday be hers. You've come full circle, Thomas observed, his voice low, the flute now resting in his lap. From Lawson, a family to find in one. Ethan nodded, his gaze on Emily's sleeping form, the firelight playing across her features. Not the path I'd have chosen, he admitted, but I'm grateful for where it led. He paused, the weight of the moment settling over him. The old ones say our spirits know each other, life after life. Maybe this was always meant to be. Thomas's eyes gleamed with quiet wisdom. The land brings us together, brother. You and Emily, she's your path now. Ethan didn't reply, but as he looked up at the star-filled sky, he felt a sense of rightness, a certainty that whatever forces had brought Emily into his life, chance, fate, or the spirits of those he had lost, he would honor the gift by being the father she needed. The return journey to the trading post took 3 days, a meandering route that allowed Emily to sketch the landscape, her notebook filling with images of the prairie, the mountains, and the small moments that defined their trip. A hawk circling overhead, Thomas braiding sage into Willow's mane, Ethan's quiet smile as he watched her ride. With each mile, her voice grew stronger, her words more frequent, as if the visit to the homestead had unlocked something within her. Race you home, she called suddenly as they crested the final ridge, the trading post coming into view, its log walls a beacon of warmth against the green hills. Before Ethan could respond, she spurred Sage forward, galloping down the slope with a joyful abandon that made his heart ache with gratitude. Thomas laughed, a deep resonant sound. "Better catch up, my friend," he advised, his eyes twinkling. "That one won't wait for you to find your courage." Ethan spurred midnight after her, feeling younger than he had in years, Emily's laughter floating back to him on the prairie wind like a song of renewal. Clara stood on the porch, shading her eyes as the riders approached, her expression shifting from concern to astonishment as she saw Emily leading the charge. "Land's sakes!" she exclaimed as Emily reined in, her face flushed with triumph. "Is that you makin' all that noise, Emily Dawson?" "Emily Dawson Caldwell," the girl corrected, dismounting with a grace honed by months of practice, her voice clear and proud. "And yes, it's me, Clara. I can talk now." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she enveloped Emily in a fierce embrace, her usual sternness melting into maternal pride. "So I hear," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And what a beautiful sound it is." As they gathered inside, the main room alive with the warmth of homecoming, Ethan felt the weight of the journey settle into a quiet certainty. Emily was no longer a guest, a survivor to be sheltered. She was family, her presence a light that had banished the shadows from his heart. The trading post, once a refuge from the world, was now a home in truth, its walls echoing with the laughter of a child who had found her place among them. The Montana spring unfolded in a symphony of renewal, the prairie alive with the hum of bees and the vibrant hues of wildflowers that seemed to defy the land's harsh history. At the Caldwell trading post, life had settled into a rhythm of purpose and warmth, the log walls echoing with the laughter of Emily Dawson Caldwell, whose presence had transformed the outpost from a refuge of solitude into a true home. Ethan Caldwell, once a man defined by loss, now moved through his days with a quiet vitality, his heart anchored by the girl who had become his daughter in all but name. Yet as the days lengthened, a new challenge emerged, one that would test the bonds they had forged and the future they were building. The evening before their planned journey to the Dawson homestead, Ethan found Emily standing before the charcoal sketch of Willow's song and starling, her dark eyes studying the image with an intensity that suggested deep reflection. The sketch, a touchstone of Ethan's past, had become a symbol of the trading post's evolving family, its presence a reminder that love could endure loss and find new forms. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, joining her, his voice low and steady. "It's time we added to this wall. A proper family portrait, you, me, Clara, Thomas. Miss Mitchell says a photographer's coming to Willow Creek next month. We could go if you'd like." Emily's eyes widened, a spark of excitement breaking through her solemn expression. She retrieved her notebook, a constant companion despite her growing use of her voice, and wrote quickly, "A real photograph to hang here." Ethan nodded, tapping the wall beside the sketch. "Right here. This is your home now, Emily. Your image belongs on these walls." Emily considered this, then wrote again, her expression serious. "Would Willow's song and starling mind? I'm not trying to replace them." The question struck Ethan with its tenderness, a reflection of Emily's care for the family she had never met but honored through his stories. "No," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "They'd be pleased, I think. Willow's song always said a home needs children's laughter to be truly alive. You've brought that back to this place." Emily smiled, satisfied, then wrote one more note, her hand hesitating before showing it to him. "If this is my home forever, should I have your name?" "Emily Dawson Caldwell." The question caught Ethan off guard, though it echoed the conversation they had shared at the homestead when she had first claimed the name. In the months since, their bond had deepened, a family in practice but not yet formalized, held back by Ethan's lingering fear that embracing this new life might somehow diminish the memory of Willow's song and starling. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice careful, searching her eyes for certainty. Emily nodded without hesitation, then wrote, "I'll always be Emily Dawson. I remember my parents every day. But I'm also someone new now. You gave me that, a new life." Before Ethan could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them, sharp and urgent in the quiet evening. Thomas entered, his broad frame filling the doorway, his expression serious. "Riders common," he announced, his voice low. "Army patrol. Looks like Captain Hayes among 'em." Ethan frowned, his instincts flaring. Hayes wasn't due for another week, when they planned to return from the homestead. An unscheduled visit spelled trouble, a disruption to the fragile peace they had built. Emily's hand slipped into his, seeking reassurance, her eyes reflecting the same unease. "It's all right," Ethan told her, squeezing her hand. "Stay with Clara while I see what this is about." Outside, Captain Daniel Hayes dismounted with 5 soldiers, his young face grave but not panicked, his cavalry hat in hand as he approached. "Caldwell," he greeted, his tone respectful but weighted with purpose. "Sorry to show up unannounced. We've got news you need to hear before you head to the Dawson claim." Ethan tensed, his hand resting on the porch railing. "More trouble with Kane's men." "No, nothing like that," Hayes assured him, his voice steady. "But we've made a discovery you should know about." He glanced toward the trading post, where Emily stood in the doorway, her small figure framed by the lamplight. "Emily should hear this too, if you think she's ready." Ethan hesitated, weighing the potential impact on the girl who had only recently begun to find her voice. But her strength, proven in the canyon and at the homestead, gave him confidence. "She's stronger than she looks," he said, nodding. "We'll face it together." When Emily joined them on the porch, her hand still in Ethan's, Hayes removed his hat again, addressing her with the same respect he showed Ethan. "Miss Dawson," he began, his voice gentle, "we've located a survivor from another wagon in your train, a woman named Alina Chen. She was found by Blackfoot hunters, badly wounded but alive, and she's been recovering in their camp through the winter." Emily's eyes widened, her grip on Ethan's hand tightening, a mix of hope and uncertainty flickering across her face. "She asked about you specifically," Hayes continued. "Said she was friends with your ma during the journey. Her husband was the wagon train's doctor, but he and their son were killed in the attack. She escaped into the brush and held on till help came." Emily looked up at Ethan, her expression a complex tapestry of emotions, hope for a connection to her past, fear of what it might mean for her future. "She's asking to see you," Hayes said, his tone kind but direct. "She's at Fort Benton now, recovering her strength before heading east to live with her sister in St. Louis." Ethan knelt to meet Emily's gaze, his voice steady. "This is your decision, Emily. We can delay our trip to the homestead and visit Mrs. Chen first if you'd like." Emily considered this, her brow furrowing, then took out her notebook, writing a message for both Ethan and Hayes to see. Mrs. Chen was kind to me. She taught me about plants and medicine on the journey. I'd like to see her. Ethan nodded, a quiet pride in her courage. "Then we'll leave for Fort Benton in the morning." As Hayes and his men departed, promising to escort them to the fort, Ethan felt a stir of unease, a fear that this new connection might pull Emily away from the life they were building. But he pushed it aside, trusting her strength and the bond they had forged. That night, as Ethan checked their preparations for the altered journey, he found Emily sitting on the porch steps, gazing at the stars, her notebook open in her lap. Her restlessness was palpable, a mirror to his own. "Trouble sleepin'?" he asked, settling beside her, the cool night air carrying the scent of sage and earth. Emily nodded, then wrote, the lamplight illuminating her careful script. Asterisk, what if Mrs. Chen wants to take me to St. Louis? Asterisk, the question struck at Ethan's deepest fear. The possibility that this newfound family could be torn apart, just as his first had been. But he wouldn't lie to her, not even to ease his own anxiety. She'd have the right to ask, he said carefully, his voice steady. She was a friend of your ma's, and if she feels a responsibility toward you. Emily shook her head vigorously, her pencil pressing hard against the paper. Asterisk, I don't want to go. My home is here now. Asterisk, the force of her words, even in silence, was a testament to her resolve, and Ethan felt a surge of relief tempered by duty. I know, he assured her, his hand resting on her shoulder. And I'd fight to keep you here, if that's what you want. But we should hear what Mrs. Chen has to say. She might just want to know you're safe, that you're cared for. Emily considered this, then wrote more calmly, asterisk, will you tell her about us? About our family here, asterisk. Yes, Ethan promised, the words slipping out naturally, carrying a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. I'll make sure she understands you've got a home and folks who love you. The word love came unbidden, a truth he had avoided for 5 years, fearing it would invite loss. Now it felt right, necessary, a declaration of the bond that had grown between them. Emily's smile was luminous, as if she had been waiting for this confirmation, her heart already certain of what Ethan was only beginning to voice. 2 days later, they arrived at Fort Benton, the bustling army outpost alive with the clatter of wagons and the shouts of soldiers drilling in the yard. Elena Chen was staying in the officers' quarters, her physical recovery well advanced, though grief had etched lines around her eyes and threaded silver through her dark hair. When Emily entered the room, escorted by Ethan and Clara, Mrs. Chen's face lit with a mixture of relief and sorrow, her eyes filling with tears. Emily, she whispered, her voice trembling, thank God. I prayed you'd survived somehow. The woman looked to Ethan, her gratitude palpable. Captain Hayes told me how you protected her, Mr. Caldwell, how you fought those terrible men. I can't thank you enough. Ethan nodded, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder, a silent anchor. She's part of our family now, he said simply, the words carrying a quiet conviction. Mrs. Chen turned to Emily, her voice soft. Your ma spoke of you every day, Emily. How proud she was of your courage, your kindness. Emily retrieved her notebook, writing swiftly, and handed it to Ethan to read aloud. I miss them every day, he read, his voice steady, but Mr. Caldwell understands. He lost his family too. We help each other. Mrs. Chen smiled through her tears, reaching for Emily's hand, and this time Emily didn't flinch, her trust in her new family giving her the strength to accept the gesture. I'm going to St. Louis to live with my sister, Mrs. Chen said, her voice gentle. There'd be a place for you there, Emily, if you wanted it. Emily shook her head immediately, writing again, asterisk, thank you, but my home is with Mr. Caldwell now. I belong to the trading post. Asterisk, Mrs. Chen nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. I thought you might say that, and I'm not surprised. But I wanted you to know you have options, connections to your past. She reached for a small trunk beside her bed, withdrawing a wooden box with the initials AD carved into the lid. This was your ma's keepsake box, she explained, handing it to Emily. The Blackfoot who found me helped me save it. It's got her wedding band, some letters, a lock of your hair from when you were a baby, things she'd want you to have. Emily accepted the box with trembling hands, opening it to reveal the treasures within, tangible links to the family she had lost. Her eyes filled with tears, but her expression was one of gratitude, not despair. There's one more thing, Mrs. Chen said, reaching into her pocket. She held out a silver pocket watch, its case dented but intact. This was your pa's. He'd check it every hour on the journey, always fussin' about mackin' good time. Her voice softened, a fond memory breaking through her grief. He was so excited about your new home, Emily. Had such plans for that land. Emily took the watch, holding it to her ear to hear its steady ticking, a sound that seemed to carry her father's presence across the months of loss. The visit stretched into the afternoon, Mrs. Chen sharing stories of the journey, Abigail's love of wildflowers, John's knack for fixing anything with a hammer and a prayer, that filled gaps in Emily's memories, weaving a richer tapestry of her parents' lives. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Chen embraced Emily tightly, her voice a promise. "I'll write to you, and maybe someday, when you're older, you'll visit me in St. Louis." Emily nodded, then surprised both adults by reaching up to kiss Mrs. Chen's cheek, a spontaneous gesture of affection that marked how far she had come from the fearful child who recoiled at touch. As they rode away from Fort Benton, Emily's new treasures carefully packed in her saddlebag, Ethan noticed a subtle change in her, a stillness that spoke of deep thought rather than trauma. That evening, at a campsite beside a small creek, Emily sat beside Ethan as he tended the fire, Thomas checking the horses in the fading light. "Father," Emily said suddenly, her voice clear and deliberate, the words striking Ethan like a thunderclap. It was the first time she had called him that, a choice that carried the weight of her heart's decision. "I want to be Emily Dawson Caldwell now." The sound of her voice, strong and certain after months of silence, was a miracle, but the word father was a gift, a bond sealed in the quiet of the Montana night. Ethan stared at her, his throat tight, watching as she gathered herself to continue. "Seeing Mrs. Chen made me remember," she said, each word measured, precious. "But I'm not just what happened to me. I'm what happens next, too." She reached for his hand, her expression serious. "You said family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's who finds you when you're lost." "Yes," Ethan managed, his voice rough with emotion, the weight of her words settling into him like a cornerstone. "You found me, Emily, and I found you. We ain't lost anymore." Under the vast Montana sky, beside a small campfire that held back the wilderness dark, Ethan Caldwell embraced his daughter, not a replacement for Starling, but a new beginning, a testament to the resilience of love in a land that tested the soul. As the stars emerged, Emily's voice joined Ethan's in a quiet prayer of thanksgiving. One willow song had taught him long ago, words of gratitude for family, for shelter, for the chance to begin again. Winter descended upon the Montana territory with a quiet ferocity, blanketing the prairie in snow that glittered like diamond dust under the pale December sun. The Caldwell trading post stood resolute against the cold, its log walls warmed by the glow of lamplight and the laughter that now filled its rooms. Ethan Caldwell, once a man adrift in the shadow of loss, had found his anchor in Emily Dawson Caldwell, the girl whose courage and resilience had rekindled his heart. The trading post, once a mere outpost on the edge of the wilderness, had become a beacon of hope, its doors open to travelers and neighbors who marveled at the transformation wrought by a child's presence. The months following the visit to Fort Benton had been a time of deepening bonds and quiet triumphs. Emily's voice, once locked away by trauma, grew stronger with each passing day, her words a melody that filled the trading post with life. She spoke of her parents, John and Abigail Dawson, with a tenderness that honored their memory, and of Willow's song and Starling with a reverence that wove Ethan's past into her own. Her drawings, once simple sketches, evolved into intricate works that captured the spirit of the land and its people. Thomas Red Elk's steady hands braiding sage, Clara Thompson's garden thriving against the odds, and Ethan's weathered face softened by a smile he hadn't known he still possessed. The legal process to formalize Emily's adoption began in late summer, a journey through the territorial court in Virginia City that tested Ethan's patience but not his resolve. With Captain Daniel Hayes's unwavering support, Ethan petitioned to become Emily's legal guardian, a step that felt both monumental and inevitable. The court, swayed by the evidence of Emily's thriving under Ethan's care, her academic progress under Sarah Mitchell's tutelage, her integration into the Trading Post's daily life, and the testimony of Hayes and Clara, granted the adoption in November 1879. The documents, bearing the territorial seal, officially named her Emily Dawson Caldwell, a name that carried the weight of two families and the promise of a shared future. The Trading Post flourished with a renewed sense of purpose, its reputation spreading beyond the Yellowstone River Valley. It was no longer just a place for fair trade, where prospectors and Blackfoot families bartered for supplies. It was a home where a half-Blackfoot former scout, his adopted daughter, and their unconventional family had built something extraordinary from the ashes of tragedy. Neighbors from Willow Creek, once wary of Ethan's solitary nature, now stopped by with gifts of preserves or hand-stitched quilts, drawn by the warmth of the Trading Post's hearth and the story of the girl who had brought it to life. Barn dances in the community hall, a frontier tradition that blended square dances with Blackfoot rhythms, became a regular outing, Emily's laughter mingling with the fiddle's tune as she spun across the floor with Clara or Thomas. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, blanketing the Trading Post in a hush that felt sacred, Emily presented Ethan with a carefully wrapped gift, a labor of love she had kept secret for weeks. The family gathered in the main room, the air thick with the scent of pine boughs and Clara's molasses cookies, a fire crackling in the hearth. Thomas played a soft Blackfoot melody on his flute, its notes weaving a thread of continuity between past and present, while Clara fussed over a pot of cider, her stern demeanor softened by the season's warmth. Ethan unwrapped the gift, revealing a framed drawing, its details rendered with a precision that belied Emily's 11 years. The drawing depicted the Trading Post as it stood, its log walls sturdy against the snowy landscape, but with additions that spoke of Emily's vision for the future. An expanded main building with a new wing for guests, a proper stable for the horses, and, most strikingly, a small schoolhouse nearby, its windows glowing with imagined light. "For our future," Emily said, her voice clear and confident, a far cry from the whisper that had first called the Trading Post home. "I thought, when I'm older, we could teach Blackfoot kids and settler kids together. Thomas says understanding between folks starts with the young." Ethan studied the drawing, his throat tight with emotion, seeing in its lines an echo of dreams he had once shared with Willow Song, dreams of a place where their mixed heritage could bridge divides, where children of different worlds could learn side by side. "It's perfect," he said, his voice husky, meeting Emily's hopeful gaze. "We'll build it together, step by step." The promise was more than a commitment to a building. It was a vow to nurture the future she envisioned, to make the Trading Post a legacy of unity and healing. Clara, her eyes misty, placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've got a big heart, child, and a bigger mind. This old place ain't never seen the like." Thomas nodded, his flute now resting in his lap, his voice deep with approval. "The old ones would say your spirit's strong, Emily. You carry the land's dreams, and now you're given shape." The moment, simple yet profound, sealed the Trading Post's transformation, a family bound not by blood but by choice, their shared vision alight against the winter dark. As the new year approached, Ethan stood on the porch one clear, cold night, the northern lights dancing across the sky in shimmering curtains of green and violet. Emily joined him, wrapped in a quilt against the chill, her breath forming clouds in the frosty air. The silence between them was comfortable, a testament to the trust they had built. "Do you think they can see us?" she asked softly, her voice a gentle melody in the quiet night. "My parents in Willow Song and Starling." Ethan put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against the cold, his gaze on the celestial display. "The Blackfoot believe the spirits of those we've lost watch over us from the stars," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "So yeah, I think they can see us." Emily considered this, then smiled, her face illuminated by the aurora's glow. "I hope they're proud." "They are," Ethan assured her, his certainty absolute. How could they not be? Together, father and daughter watched the northern lights paint the sky, their journey a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It had begun in separate tragedies: bandits attacking her wagon train, Ethan finding her hidden in the rocks. But what had started as a reluctant rescue had become a mutual salvation, proving that even in the harshest wilderness, new families could take root and flourish. As Emily leaned against him, secure in the knowledge that she was home, Ethan silently thanked whatever fate had brought this remarkable child into his life. Some wounds never fully healed, but in her presence, he had found a reason to look forward, to build rather than merely survive. The trading post, once a place of exile, was now a sanctuary, its future bright with the promise of Emily's dreams: a schoolhouse, a community, a legacy of love. The winter night stretched on, the stars a silent witness to their bond. Inside, Clara lit another lamp, its glow spilling through the windows, while Thomas's flute resumed its melody, a Blackfoot song of homecoming that seemed to rise and merge with the aurora's light. Ethan and Emily turned to go inside, where warmth and family awaited, their steps light with the certainty of belonging. And as the door closed behind them, the Montana sky shimmered on, a canvas of hope in a land that had tested them and found them whole. The Montana Territory, spring 1885, bloomed with a vitality that mirrored the passage of time, the prairie a vibrant canvas of emerald and gold, its hills alive with the songs of meadowlarks and the gentle rush of Cottonwood Creek. The Caldwell trading post, now a cornerstone of the Yellowstone River Valley, stood as a testament to resilience, its log walls weathered but proud, expanded with a new wing for travelers and a stable that housed horses gleaming with health. The garden, Clara Thompson's pride, flourished with rows of vegetables and wildflowers, a living symbol of the life that had taken root in a place once defined by loss. At the heart of the grounds, a small schoolhouse stood, its whitewashed walls and bell tower a realization of a dream first sketched by a child's hand 6 years ago. Ethan Caldwell, now in his late 40s, stood on the porch, his hazel eyes tracing the horizon where the Absaroka Range loomed like silent guardians. The years had etched deeper lines into his face, but they were lines of purpose, not despair, his broad shoulders unbowed by the weight of the past. The scar on his arm, a faint reminder of the canyon battle, was a badge of survival, a mark of the moment he had chosen to fight for something new. Beside him, Emily Dawson Caldwell, now 17, leaned against the railing, her dark hair woven with a Blackfoot beaded band, her eyes bright with the quiet confidence of a young woman who had found her place in the world. She was no longer the silent, traumatized girl who had hidden in the rocks. She was a scholar, an artist, and a bridge between cultures, her voice a melody that carried the strength of both her Dawson heritage and her Caldwell home. The schoolhouse, completed the previous summer, was Emily's triumph, a vision born in the wake of tragedy and nurtured by the family that had claimed her. It was a modest building, its single room lined with bookshelves and desks, but it was a beacon of hope, welcoming Blackfoot children from nearby camps and settler children from Willow Creek. Sarah Mitchell, now a fixture in the community, taught alongside Emily, who had taken to education with a passion that rivaled her skill with a pencil. The school's opening had been celebrated with a frontier festival, a day of barn dances, Blackfoot drumming, and potluck feasts that drew families from across the valley. The event, now an annual tradition, had become a symbol of unity, its laughter and music a testament to Emily's dream of understanding between peoples. "Looks like a good day for the festival," Ethan remarked, his voice a low rumble breaking the morning's quiet. The air carried the scent of fresh-baked bread and roasting venison, preparations for the day's celebration already underway. Clara, now in her 60s but as formidable as ever, was directing a group of neighbors in the yard, her apron dusted with flour as she orchestrated the feast with the precision of a general. Thomas Red Elk, his hair now fully silvered, was teaching a group of children to braid sage, his deep voice weaving stories of the land's spirits, a Blackfoot tradition that Emily had embraced and shared with her students. Emily smiled, her notebook, still a companion though now filled with lesson plans and sketches, tucked under her arm. "I was thinking we could start with a storytelling circle this year," she said, her voice clear and warm, a far cry from the whisper that had first called the trading post home. "Thomas has a new tale about the star spirits, and I've got one about Ma and Pa's journey west. I want the kids to know where we all come from." Ethan nodded, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. "That's a fine idea. Stories keep us rooted, like those cottonwoods we planted at your folks' homestead." The saplings, now sturdy trees, stood on the rise overlooking Cottonwood Creek, a memorial to John and Abigail Dawson that Emily visited each spring, honoring their dreams while building her own. The homestead remained undeveloped, its land held in trust until Emily came of age, but she had plans. A small cabin, perhaps a place to visit and reflect, a testament to the family that had set her on this path. The festival began at noon, the trading post grounds alive with color and sound. Women in calico dresses and men in denim mingled with Blackfoot families in beaded regalia, their voices blending in a chorus of greetings and laughter. A fiddler struck up a lively tune, joined by a Blackfoot drum circle, the rhythms weaving together in a harmony that echoed Emily's vision. Children raced across the grass, their shouts mingling with the clang of horseshoes and the sizzle of meat on the fire. Clara's table groaned under the weight of cornbread, venison stew, and apple pies, a feast that drew praise from even the sternest ranchers. At the schoolhouse, Emily gathered the children in a circle on the grass, their faces alight with anticipation. Thomas began, his voice deep and resonant, telling of the star spirits who guided hunters through the night, a Blackfoot tale that spoke of connection and endurance. Emily followed, her story of her parents' journey west a blend of sorrow and hope, her words painting a vivid picture of a wagon train under a boundless sky, of Abigail's love for wildflowers and John's dreams of a new home. The children listened, rapt, their eyes reflecting the power of stories to bind past and present, to make sense of a world that could be both cruel and kind. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a golden glow over the festival, Ethan took his place beside Emily, addressing the gathered crowd. 6 years ago, he began, his voice carrying the weight of memory, this trading post was a place of survival, not living. Then Emily came, and she showed us what it means to build something new from broken pieces. This schoolhouse, this community, it's her dream, but it's ours too because she made us a family. The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces reflecting the truth of his words. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I lost one family to the wilderness," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd, "but I found another here with all of you. This schoolhouse ain't just for learning reading and written. It's for learning each other, for making sure our children grow up knowing we're all part of the same land." Applause rose, warm and heartfelt, a chorus of support for the girl who had become a leader in her own right. Later, as the festival wound down and the stars emerged in the deepening sky, Ethan and Emily stood by the schoolhouse, watching the last of the revelers depart. The bell tower gleamed in the moonlight, a symbol of the future they had built together. "You've done something remarkable here," Ethan said, his voice soft, the pride in his tone unmistakable. "Your ma and pa Willow song starling, they'd all be proud." Emily smiled, her hand resting on the schoolhouse door. "I feel sometimes," she said, her voice a quiet melody. "In the wind in the stories. They're part of this place just like we are." She paused, then added, "Thank you, Father, for giving me a home to build this in." Ethan's throat tightened, the word father still a gift, even after years of hearing it. "You gave me a home too, Emily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought I'd have again." They stood in silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket, the trading post a beacon of light in the vast Montana wilderness. The years that followed saw the trading post grow, its schoolhouse a model for others in the territory, its festival a cherished tradition that drew visitors from as far as Helena. Emily, now a teacher and artist, continued to bridge cultures, her drawings published in territorial newspapers, her lessons shaping a generation that saw no divide between Blackfoot and settler. Ethan, ever her protector, took on the role of elder, his stories of the frontier and Blackfoot wisdom a cornerstone of the community's identity. Clara, though slowed by age, remained the heart of the trading post, her garden a symbol of endurance, while Thomas's flute melodies carried the spirit of the land into the future. The Caldwell trading post became a legend, a place where a half-Blackfoot scout and a girl found in the rocks had woven a tapestry of love and resilience, proving that family is not bound by blood, but by the courage to choose one another. And as the stars shone over the Montana prairie, their light a silent witness to a legacy that would endure, Ethan and Emily knew that their journey, born in tragedy, forged in hope, had created something eternal, a home where the lost could always be found. The Montana Territory, now a state in the burgeoning United States of 1892, stood at the crossroads of past and future, its prairies and mountains a testament to the dreams and struggles of those who had carved a life from its rugged embrace. The Caldwell trading post, nestled along the banks of Cottonwood Creek, had grown into a vibrant hub, its log walls expanded to accommodate a steady stream of travelers, settlers, and Blackfoot families seeking trade and community. The schoolhouse, Emily Dawson Caldwell's enduring gift, stood as a beacon of unity, its bell tower ringing out across the valley, calling children of diverse heritages to learn together under its whitewashed roof. The trading post was no longer just a place. It was a legend, a living monument to the family forged in the crucible of 1879, when a half-Blackfoot scout and a girl found in the rocks had chosen to rebuild what tragedy had torn apart. Ethan Caldwell, now in his mid-50s, stood on the rise overlooking the trading post, his graying hair catching the spring breeze, his hazel eyes tracing the horizon where the Absaroka Range loomed like ancient storytellers. The years had softened his edges, the once stern lines of his face now tempered by a quiet contentment, though the scar on his arm, a faded echo of the canyon battle, remained a silent testament to the battles fought for love and survival. He was no longer just a scout or a trader. He was an elder, a keeper of stories, his voice a bridge between the Blackfoot traditions of his mother and the frontier spirit of his father. Beside him, Emily Dawson Caldwell, now 24, stood tall and radiant, her dark hair woven with a beaded band gifted by Thomas Red Elk's sister, her eyes alight with the wisdom and passion of a woman who had shaped a community. She was a teacher, an artist, a leader, her name known across Montana for the schoolhouse that had become a model for cultural unity. The trading post had evolved with the times, its role expanding as Montana transitioned from territory to statehood. The new wing, completed in 1888, housed a small library of books and maps, a nod to Emily's love of learning and Ethan's scouting days, when knowledge of the land was a matter of survival. The stable, now a sprawling structure, sheltered horses and mules for traders and visitors, its timbers etched with Blackfoot symbols of protection. Clara Thompson, though slowed by age, remained the heart of the trading post, her garden a riot of color that drew admiration from every passerby. Thomas Red Elk, his silver hair a crown of wisdom, continued to guide the community, his flute melodies and stories a thread that wove past and present into a seamless tapestry. The annual festival, now a cornerstone of Montana's cultural calendar, drew crowds from Helena and beyond. Its blend of barn dances, Blackfoot ceremonies, and pioneer feasts, a celebration of the unity Emily had envisioned as a child. On this spring morning, the trading post prepared for a special ceremony, a Blackfoot ritual to honor the land and its spirits, a tradition that had grown alongside the schoolhouse's mission. The community gathered in a clearing near the creek, where a circle of stones marked a sacred space, sage bundles smoldering at its edges, their fragrant smoke curling toward the sky. Emily, dressed in a simple calico dress adorned with Blackfoot beadwork, stood at the circle's center, her notebook replaced by a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with lessons, sketches, and reflections on the life she had built. Ethan stood beside her, his presence a quiet anchor, while Clara and Thomas flanked them, their faces etched with pride and reverence. The ceremony began with Thomas's flute, its haunting notes rising like a prayer, calling the spirits of the land and sky to witness. A Blackfoot elder, Thomas's uncle, spoke in the language of their people, his voice deep and resonant, recounting the story of the trading post's founding, not as a tale of conquest, but as a circle of healing, where a man and a girl had found each other in the wilderness and built a home for all. Mitakui Oyasin, he intoned, the Lakota phrase adopted by the Blackfoot here, meaning we are all related. The words hung in the air, a reminder that family transcended blood, that the land bound them all in a shared destiny. Emily stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, carrying the cadence of a storyteller who had learned from both Blackfoot elders and pioneer preachers. 13 years ago, she began, her eyes sweeping the gathered crowd, Blackfoot families in beaded regalia, settlers in denim and calico, children from the schoolhouse clutching wildflowers. I was lost, hidden in the rocks, my world shattered by violence. Ethan Caldwell found me, not just to save me, but to give me a home. This trading post, this schoolhouse, this community, they're our story, but they're yours too. We've built something that honors our past while dreaming of our future. She paused, her gaze settling on Ethan, a smile softening her features. My parents, John and Abigail Dawson, dreamed of a home on this land. Ethan's wife and daughter, Willow Song and Starling, dreamed of a place where all could belong. Today we honor them, not with tears but with the lives we've built, the children we teach, the stories we share. The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces reflecting the truth of her words, many wiping away tears as they remembered their own losses and triumphs. The elder led a sage blessing, passing a bundle through the circle, its smoke purifying the space and the hearts within it. Emily and Ethan placed offerings at the circle's center, a lock of Emily's hair symbolizing her Dawson roots, a carved wooden hawk, a gift from Ethan's mother representing his Blackfoot heritage, and a small sketch of the trading post, Emily's creation, tying their shared journey to the land. The elder chanted, his voice rising with the wind, invoking the spirits to bless the trading post's future, to guide its children and protect its dreams. As the ceremony concluded, the community transitioned to the festival, the clearing transforming into a vibrant tapestry of sound and color. A fiddler struck up "Turkey in the Straw," joined by Blackfoot drummers, the rhythms blending in a joyous harmony that echoed the trading post spirit. Tables groaned under the weight of Clara's cornbread, venison stew, and huckleberry pies, a feast that drew laughter and praise. Children from the schoolhouse performed a play Emily had written, a tale of a Blackfoot girl and a settler boy learning to share the land, their voices ringing with the innocence and hope of youth. Barn dances spilled into the evening, couples spinning under lanterns strung between the trees, their laughter a melody that carried across the prairie. Ethan and Emily stood by the schoolhouse, watching the celebration unfold, the bell tower gleaming in the twilight. "You've changed this place," Ethan said, his voice soft but heavy with pride. "Not just the trading post, but the whole valley. Folks talk about the Caldwell schoolhouse as far as Bozeman." Emily smiled, her hand resting on the journal at her side. "We changed it, Father," she corrected, the word still a gift even after years. "You gave me a home to dream in, and Thomas and Clara gave me the strength to build it. This is our legacy, all of us." She paused, her eyes tracing the crowd, where Blackfoot elders shared stories with settler ranchers, where children of different worlds played as one. "I've been thinking about the homestead," she added. "When I'm ready, I'll build that cabin we talked about, a place to visit, to keep Ma and Pa's dreams alive. But my home's here always." Ethan nodded, his throat tight, the weight of her words settling into him like a final piece of a puzzle long in the making. "You're right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is home for all of us." He looked out over the trading post, its lights a constellation against the darkening sky, and felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, a journey born in the rocks, forged in battle, and sealed in love. The 1890s brought new challenges and opportunities. As Montana's statehood ushered in railroads, land reforms, and debates over governance that tested the balance between progress and tradition. The trading post became a voice in these discussions, Emily serving on a territorial education board, advocating for schools that honored both Blackfoot and settler heritage. Ethan, respected as an elder, advised on land treaties, his Blackfoot roots and frontier experience a bridge between worlds. Clara, though retired from daily management, remained a matriarch, her wisdom sought by young mothers and old ranchers alike. Thomas, now a grandfather, passed his flute to his grandson, ensuring the melodies of their people would endure. The schoolhouse grew, its curriculum blending reading, arithmetic, and Blackfoot lore with pioneer history, its graduates carrying Emily's vision into the world. Her drawings, now exhibited in Helena's new art gallery, captured the soul of Montana, its prairies, its people, its stories of survival and unity. The festival, a yearly pilgrimage, evolved into a statewide event, its blend of cultures a model for a nation grappling with its own diversity. The Trading Post's library, stocked with books from Boston and Blackfoot oral histories transcribed by Emily, became a haven for scholars and storytellers, its shelves a testament to the power of knowledge to heal and unite. On a quiet evening in 1895, as Ethan and Emily stood by the creek, the cottonwood trees whispering in the breeze, they reflected on the circle their lives had formed. "The Blackfoot say our spirits travel together, life after life," Ethan said, his voice soft, the stars above mirroring the lights of the trading post below. "I reckon we were meant to find each other, Emily, to build this." Emily nodded, her journal open to a new sketch, a vision of the trading post in decades to come, its schoolhouse expanded, its festival a beacon for generations. "We're not just a family," she said, her voice a quiet hymn to the land. "We're a story, one that'll keep going long after we're gone." She slipped her hand into Ethan's, the gesture as natural as it had been 13 years ago, when a girl and a man had chosen to be more than survivors. As they turned toward the trading post, where Clara's laughter and Thomas's flute welcomed them home, the Montana sky shimmered with stars, a silent witness to a legacy that would endure. The Caldwell trading post, born in the shadow of loss, had become a light in the wilderness, a proof that love, courage, and community could transform even the harshest land into a place of eternal belonging. And as the circle closed, Ethan and Emily knew their story, woven from tragedy, sealed in hope, would live on, a song of the frontier that would never fade.